They said she didn't exist. But when Mara Varel's scent flooded the throne room that winter morning, everything changed. The Alpha King stumbled, the council panicked, and by nightfall, they'd given the order, erase her. This is the story of the Omega they tried to bury, and the power that refused to stay hidden. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will blow your mind. Mara had learned early that invisibility was survival. She kept her head down in the corridors of Frosthold Citadel, her steps light against the stone floors, her scent buried under layers of chemical suppressants that made her skin itch and her stomach churn. The other Omegas whispered about her sometimes, low-born, plain, forgettable, but never loud enough for her to hear. Not that it mattered, she'd stopped listening years ago. The Citadel was a fortress carved into the northern cliffs, all black stone and iron gates, built to withstand sieges and storms. It was also a prison for people like her. Omegas without family connections, without beauty or charm, or anything that might catch an alpha's eye, were assigned to service roles: cleaning, cooking, mending. Mara worked in the lower kitchens where the heat from the ovens made the suppressant patches on her neck peel at the edges. No one noticed. No one cared. And that was exactly how she'd survived this long. "Varel, stop daydreaming and move those supplies." Mara flinched at the sharp voice of Overseer Holt, a beta woman with a face like carved granite and a temper to match. She nodded quickly, hauling a crate of root vegetables toward the prep station. Her arms ached. The suppressants made everything harder, dulled her senses, slowed her reflexes, left her perpetually exhausted. But the alternative was worse. Without them, she'd be visible. And visible Omegas in Frosthold didn't last long. She'd seen it happen before. A girl named Lissa, just 17, had missed a dose last year. Her scent had bloomed in the servants' quarters, sweet, floral, Omega, and within hours, 3 alphas had tried to claim her. The council had intervened, of course. They always did. Lissa had been relocated to the outer settlements. No one ever came back from the outer settlements. Mara kept her head down and worked. The day passed in a blur of chopping, stirring, scrubbing. The head cook, a gruff older beta named Wren, barely acknowledged her existence except to bark orders. The other kitchen workers ignored her. She preferred it that way. Anonymity was armor. By evening, her shift ended and she made her way through the dimly lit corridors toward the Omega dormitories. The Citadel was vast, a maze of halls and staircases that climbed toward the upper levels where the council chambers and royal quarters sat like a crown atop the fortress. Mara had never been up there. She had no reason to be. She pushed open the heavy door to the dormitory, a long, narrow room lined with thin cots and shared storage chests. A few other Omegas were already inside, changing out of their work clothes or preparing for sleep. They glanced at her, then away. No greetings, no conversation. Mara sat on her cot and pulled out her suppressant kit from beneath the mattress. The small metal box contained adhesive patches, pills, and a vial of clear liquid she injected weekly. She peeled off the old patch from her neck, wincing at the red, irritated skin beneath, and pressed a fresh one into place. The chemical burn was immediate. She bit down on her lip to keep from making a sound. Just another day, just another dose. Just keep going. But as she prepared the injection, her hand froze. The vial was nearly empty. Her stomach dropped. She was supposed to have 3 more doses left. She'd counted them just last week. But now, holding it up to the dim light, she could see there was barely enough for 1 injection. Maybe 2 if she stretched it. No. No, no, no. Suppressants were rationed by the council. Low-born Omegas like her received just enough to last each month, distributed at the beginning of the cycle. If she ran out early, she'd have to request more. And requesting more meant drawing attention, meant questions, meant risk. Her hands trembled as she drew the last of the liquid into the syringe. "It'll be fine. I'll make it last. I'll be careful." She injected it into her thigh, hissing at the sting, and packed the kit away. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The next morning, Mara woke to a faint, creeping unease she couldn't name. Her skin felt too warm, her senses too sharp. The usual dullness the suppressants provided, the fog that wrapped around her instincts and kept them buried, felt thinner somehow, like a blanket pulled too tight. She splashed cold water on her face from the communal basin and dressed quickly, trying to ignore the way her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "You're fine. It's just nerves. You're fine." Work started the same as always. Overseer Holt assigned her to the upper kitchens today, a rare shift reserved for serving the Citadel's higher-ranking residents. It meant better food, cleaner workstations, and the constant nerve-wracking possibility of crossing paths with someone important. Mara kept her head down and worked twice as fast as usual. The upper kitchens were different from the lower ones. Everything gleamed, polished copper pots, marble countertops, imported spices in glass jars. The other workers here were mostly betas, efficient and silent, moving through their tasks with practiced precision. Mara felt out of place immediately, like a stain on pristine fabric. "You," a sharp-faced beta woman pointed at her. "Take these up to the council dining hall. 3rd floor east wing. Don't dawdle." Mara accepted the heavy tray laden with covered dishes and tried not to think about how badly her arms were already aching. The suppressants always made her weaker, but today it felt worse. Everything felt worse. She climbed the stairs slowly, careful not to spill anything. The 3rd floor was a world apart from the lower levels. Thick carpets, muffled footsteps, tapestries depicting ancient battles hung on the walls, and the air smelled of expensive incense instead of cooking grease and sweat. She'd never been up here before. The council dining hall was at the end of a long corridor. Mara could hear voices inside, deep, authoritative, discussing things she didn't understand. Taxation, border disputes, bloodline purity. She knocked softly. "Enter." She pushed the door open with her shoulder and stepped inside. The room was enormous, dominated by a long table where 7 council members sat. At the head of the table was Councillor Wyvern, silver-haired and cold-eyed, his presence commanding even while seated. The others, 4 men, 2 women, barely glanced at her as she entered. Mara moved quickly, setting dishes in front of each council member with practiced efficiency. "Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't exist. The northern settlements are struggling again," one of the councillors was saying. "Another Omega went feral last month, had to be put down." "That's the 3rd one this year," another replied. "The suppressant formula isn't holding." "Then we need stronger doses, or fewer Omegas." They talked about her kind like livestock, like problems to be managed. Mara kept her expression neutral and continued serving. "The king is becoming difficult," Wyvern said quietly, swirling wine in his glass. "He's questioning the bond protocols again." "Let him question. He has no mate, no heir. He needs us more than we need him." For now. Mara finished her task and turned to leave. "You." She froze. Wyvern was looking at her now, his gaze sharp and assessing. "What's your designation?" Her throat went dry. "Omega, counselor." "Name?" "Mara Virel." He studied her for a long moment, then waved a dismissive hand. "Go." She didn't need to be told twice, but as she hurried from the room, she felt his eyes on her back, and something cold settled in her stomach. Being noticed by the council was never good. By midday, the unease had grown into something sharper. Mara was back in the upper kitchen, scrubbing pots with hands that wouldn't stop trembling when the first wave hit. Heat. It started low in her belly and spread outward, fast and merciless, until her entire body felt like it was burning from the inside. She stumbled, catching herself against the edge of the sink, water sloshing over the sides. No, not now, not here. She knew what this was. Heat. It shouldn't have been possible. The suppressants were supposed to stop this. They always stopped this. But the low dose, the stretched vial, it hadn't been enough. Panic clawed at her chest. "Virel, you all right?" One of the beta workers was looking at her with mild concern. "I'm fine," Mara managed, her voice strained. "Just need some air." She didn't wait for a response. She dropped the pot and hurried toward the back exit, her vision swimming, her skin on fire. The corridor outside was empty. She pressed her back against the cool stone wall and tried to breathe. "It's okay. It'll pass. Just stay calm. But it wasn't passing. The heat was getting worse, pulling at something deep inside her, something primal and terrifying. And with it came the scent. She could smell it herself now, sweet, heady Omega, rising off her skin like smoke. "No, no, no!" Footsteps, heavy, multiple sets. Mara's head snapped up. Three alphas rounded the corner, guards by the look of their uniforms. They were talking amongst themselves, laughing about something, until they stopped. All three of them froze mid-step, their heads turning in unison toward her. Their eyes changed, pupils dilating, nostrils flaring. One of them took a step forward. "Well, well," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "What do we have here?" Mara pressed herself harder against the wall. "Stay back." "An omega in heat." Another one grinned, showing too many teeth. "Unclaimed, unprotected. I said stay back." But they weren't listening. Alphas in the presence of an omega in heat rarely did. Instinct overrode reason. The bond protocols, the council's rules, the Citadel's laws, none of it mattered when the scent hit. The first alpha lunged. Mara screamed and dodged, stumbling down the corridor. Her legs felt like water. The heat made it hard to think, hard to move. She could hear them behind her, their footsteps pounding, their breathing harsh. She turned a corner and slammed directly into someone. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her. She looked up and froze. Alpha King Kael Draven stared down at her, his gray eyes wide with shock. And then the scent hit him. Mara watched it happen in real time. The way his entire body went rigid, the way his hands tightened on her shoulders, the way his breathing stopped and then restarted, harsh and ragged. The bond snapped into place between them like a chain pulled taut. She felt it, a pull so strong it made her knees buckle, a connection that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist because bonds required rituals, required council approval, required, "Your Majesty!" One of the guards who'd been chasing her skidded to a halt, his face going pale. "We didn't know. We were just—" Kael didn't look at them. His gaze was locked on Mara, his expression torn between fury and something else, something hungry. "Mine," he said, the word barely more than a growl, and then he pulled her against his chest. The world tilted. Mara's senses flooded, his scent, pine and smoke, and something darker, overwhelming everything else. The bond screamed at her to submit, to melt into him, to— "Get back," Kael snarled at the guards. They scattered. Mara tried to pull away, tried to think, but the heat and the bond and the overwhelming presence of him made it impossible. "Let me go," she managed. "You're bonded to me." His voice was rough, almost angry. "How, I don't know." "Who are you?" "Nobody. I'm nobody. Please, just, Your Majesty." The cold voice cut through everything. Counselor Veyron appeared at the end of the corridor, flanked by more guards, his expression carved from ice. "Step away from the Omega," Veyron said. Kael's arms tightened around Mara. "She's mine." "She's a mistake." Veyron's tone didn't waver. "The bond protocols require council approval. This Omega is unregistered, unsanctioned, illegal." "I don't care about your protocols." "You should." Veyron moved closer, his gaze cold and calculating. "An unsanctioned bond undermines the entire structure we've built. It cannot be allowed to stand." "She's bonded to me. You can't just—" "We can, and we will." Veyron gestured to the guards. "Take her. Touch her, and I'll rip your throat out." The threat hung in the air, raw and violent. Veyron smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You're the king, Your Majesty. But you still need the council. You still need us to maintain order, to manage the settlements, to keep the bloodlines pure. One Omega isn't worth throwing all of that away." "She's not just one Omega, she's—" "Nothing." Veyron's voice was flat. "She's nothing, and you know it." Kael's jaw clenched. His hands trembled where they held Mara, and she could feel the war raging inside him, instinct versus duty, bond versus crown. And then slowly, his arms loosened. He let her go. Mara stumbled back, her heart shattering. "Kael," she started, not even sure what she was going to say, but he wasn't looking at her anymore. "Take her," he said, his voice hollow. "Do whatever you want." The guards moved in. Mara didn't fight. What was the point? As they dragged her away, she looked back once. Kael stood in the corridor, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. And she understood. She was nothing. She always had been. The holding cell was small, cold, and utterly silent. Mara sat on the stone floor, her back against the wall, her body still trembling from the heat that refused to fade. Hours passed, maybe a full day. She couldn't tell. They brought her water once, shoved through a slot in the door, but no food, no explanation, just silence. And the bond, humming in her chest like a second heartbeat. She could feel Kyle somewhere above her, his anger, his frustration, his guilt, but he wasn't coming for her. No one was. She'd been erased, just like Lissa, just like all the others. The door opened. Counselor Veyron stepped inside, flanked by 2 guards. His silver robe swept the floor, immaculate as always. "Mara Virel," he said, pulling a scroll from his sleeve. "You have been found in violation of Citadel law, unsanctioned bonding, failure to maintain suppressant compliance, disruption of the natural order." "I didn't do anything wrong." Her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Your existence is the violation." Veyron's expression didn't change. "The bond you triggered with the king is unnatural, dangerous. It cannot be allowed to continue. So you're going to kill me." "Kill you?" Veyron actually looked surprised. "No, we're not monsters, girl. We're going to relocate you. The outer settlements need workers. You'll be useful there." The outer settlements, where Omegas disappeared, where no one survived. Mara's hands curled into fists. "You're lying. Believe what you want. The transport leaves at dawn." Veyron turned to go, and something inside Mara, something buried deep, something she'd spent years suffocating under suppressants and fear and the desperate need to stay invisible, finally cracked. "Why?" The word came out sharper than she intended. Veyron paused. "Why what? Why do you fear us so much?" "Fear you?" He actually laughed. "You're a low-born Omega with a faulty suppressant regimen. What's there to fear?" "Then why erase me? Why send me away? If I'm nothing, why does my bond with Kyle scare you?" Veyron's smile faded. "You don't understand the world you live in, girl. So explain it to me." For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then he stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost conversational. "The Citadel works because of order," he said. "Alphas rule. Betas serve. Omegas submit. That's the natural hierarchy. But bonds, true bonds, the kind that form without permission, without control, they disrupt that hierarchy. They make alphas weak, emotional, irrational." "You mean they make alphas human?" "I mean, they make alphas vulnerable." Veyron's eyes hardened. A king bonded to a nobody Omega becomes a king who can be controlled through that Omega, manipulated, destroyed. We can't allow that. "So you break the bonds." "We prevent them from forming in the first place. The suppressants, the protocols, the regulations, all of it exists to maintain control. Control over us, over Omegas. Control over everyone." Veyron straightened. "And it's worked for generations. Until you." Mara's heart pounded. "What makes me different?" "Nothing. You're an anomaly. A glitch. And we'll correct it." He gestured to the guards. "Prepare her for transport." The guards moved toward her, and then the world exploded. Bon. The tremor hit like a physical blow. The floor bucked beneath Mara's feet. The walls shuddered. Dust and small stones cascaded from the ceiling. One of the guards stumbled, cursing. "What the hell?" Veyron grabbed the doorframe for support. Another tremor, stronger this time. The entire citadel seemed to groan, a deep sound that vibrated through the stone. And then, a roar. Not human, not animal. Something else, something ancient and furious and utterly terrifying. Mara's blood ran cold. The door burst open and a panicked messenger stumbled in, his face white. "Counselor, the outer perimeter, something's breached the gates." "What is it?" Veyron demanded. "We don't know. It came from the north, from the wastelands. The guards are trying to hold it back, but—" Another roar, closer this time. The sound rattled Mara's bones. "Impossible," Veyron breathed. "Nothing lives in the wastelands. Nothing survives there." "Sir, we need to evacuate the lower levels." "No." Veyron's eyes snapped to Mara. "Seal this section. Lock her in. Whatever that thing is, it doesn't get near the council chambers." "But sir—" "Do it!" The guards hesitated, then moved. The messenger fled. Veyron followed, his robes billowing behind him, and then Mara was alone, locked in a cell, while something tore through the citadel searching for her, because somehow she knew. Whatever was out there, it was coming for her. The roaring grew closer. Mara pressed herself against the far wall of the cell, her heart hammering. The bond in her chest pulled tight, and she could feel Kael somewhere above, his alarm, his fury, his desperate attempt to reach her. But he couldn't. No one could. The door to the holding area exploded inward. Stone and metal flew. Dust filled the air. And through it, massive and terrifying, stepped something Mara had only seen in ancient drawings. A wyvern. Its scales were midnight black, its eyes burning gold. Wings folded against its back, too large for the corridor, scraping against the walls. When it opened its mouth, rows of teeth glinted in the dim light. It shouldn't exist. Wyverns had been extinct for centuries. But here it was, real and alive and staring directly at her. Mara couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The wyvern took a step forward, its massive head lowering until it was level with hers. And then it spoke, not in words, but in her mind, a voice like thunder and wind, and something far older than the citadel, older than the kingdom itself. Little Omega. Finally, you wake. Mara's knees gave out. She collapsed against the wall, shaking. What are you? I am what your bloodline forgot, what the council tried to bury. I don't understand. You will. The wyvern's golden eyes blazed, but first we run. They're coming. Who? Footsteps, shouts, the clang of weapons. The citadel guards poured into the corridor, weapons raised. The wyvern snarled, a sound that shook the walls, and turned to face them. And Mara, trapped between a creature that shouldn't exist and guards who wanted her erased, made the only choice she could. She ran toward the wyvern, toward the impossible, toward whatever the hell she was becoming. The creature's wing swept out, shielding her as fire erupted from its mouth, driving the guards back. Hold on, little Omega. This is going to hurt. Claws wrapped around her, surprisingly gentle, and then they were moving, smashing through walls, climbing toward the surface, toward freedom, toward a truth Mara wasn't ready to face. But ready or not, her old life was over. The wyvern's claws tightened around Mara as they burst through the citadel's outer wall, stone and mortar exploding outward in a shower of debris. Cold air slammed into her face, stealing her breath. Below, the fortress grounds spread out like a map, guard towers, courtyards, the massive iron gates that separated civilization from the wastelands beyond. They were headed straight for those gates. Wait, Mara gasped, but the wyvern wasn't slowing down. Hold on. The creature's wings snapped open, each one easily 30 feet across, black membrane stretched over bone that looked sharp enough to cut steel. They dove, picking up speed, the wind screaming past Mara's ears. Guards on the walls shouted, pointing. Arrows flew. One grazed the wyvern's shoulder and the beast snarled but didn't stop. The gates loomed closer. At the last second, the wyvern pulled up, wings beating hard, and they cleared the top of the wall by inches. Mara caught a glimpse of shocked faces below, guards, servants, people she'd worked beside for years. And then they were over, past the boundary, soaring into the gray expanse of the northern wastelands. The land below changed immediately. Green gave way to ash. Trees became twisted skeletal things. The ground looked scorched, broken, like something had burned it from the inside out centuries ago and it had never recovered. This was where Omegas were sent to die. And Mara was flying straight into its heart. The wyvern banked left, following a dried riverbed that cut through the desolation like a scar. They flew for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, distance swallowing the citadel until it became a dark smudge on the horizon behind them. Finally, the creature descended, landing hard in a clearing surrounded by dead trees. The impact jarred Mara's bones. The wyvern released her and she stumbled, falling to her knees on ground that felt more like gravel than earth. For a moment, she just knelt there, gasping, her mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. A wyvern, an extinct creature, speaking in her head, tearing her out of the citadel. None of it made sense. What? She looked up at the massive beast. What are you? The wyvern settled onto its haunches, wings folding with a leathery rustle. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Scales like black glass, eyes that burned with intelligence far beyond any animal. I am Ashir, last of the northern flight, bonded to your bloodline for 7 generations. Bonded to? That's impossible. My bloodline is nothing. I'm nobody. That's what they wanted you to believe. Ashir's head tilted, studying her. Tell me, little Omega, what do you know of your mother? Mara's throat tightened. She died when I was born. They told me she was a servant, low-born, like me. They lied. About what? Everything. The wyvern's golden eyes blazed. Your mother was Sarah Viril, the last Omega to carry the full awakening of the old blood. She could bend reality itself, make the invisible visible, command the elements, speak to creatures lost to time. The council feared her more than any Alpha King. Then why didn't she fight them? Why did she? She made a choice. A terrible one. Ashir's voice softened. She traded her freedom for yours, agreed to suppressants, to restrictions, to burying you in the Citadel's dungeons, all on the promise they'd let you live. Mara's chest constricted. But they lied. They always lie. Before Mara could respond, voices echoed across the wasteland, distant but getting closer. She turned and saw lights moving through the dead forest, torches, dozens of them, spreading out in a search pattern. The Citadel had sent hunters. They're coming for me, Mara breathed. Of course they are. You're the first Omega in 3 generations born with the old blood awakened. They can't let you live. The old blood? What does that even mean? It means you're dangerous. Ashir rose, muscles coiling beneath obsidian scales. It means you have power they spent centuries trying to erase. Power to break their control, to undo everything they've built. And it means if they catch you, they won't just kill you. They'll dissect you, study you, make sure no one like you ever happens again. Fear spiked through Mara's chest. So what do? Run, hide, survive. The wyvern's golden eyes narrowed. And when you're strong enough, fight back. I don't know how to survive out here. I don't know how to fight. I'm just... You're more than you know, but you won't discover it standing still. Ashir jerked its massive head toward the deeper wasteland. Go. I'll lead them away. Wait, you're leaving? I can't stay close to you. Not yet. The bond is too new, too raw. They'll track you through me. Every moment I'm near you, I'm a beacon pointing directly at where you are. The creature's voice softened, almost gentle. But I'm never far, little Omega. When you truly need me, when your life hangs by a thread, I'll come. The bond will call me, and I'll answer. How will I know when? You'll know. And then Ashir launched skyward, wings beating hard, and disappeared into the gray clouds above. Mara stood alone in the wasteland, watching the torchlight grow closer, and felt the full weight of her situation crash down on her. She had no food, no water, no shelter, no idea where to go or how to survive. Just the clothes on her back and a bond humming in her chest that connected her to a king who'd already abandoned her once. The voices grew louder, shouts, commands, the baying of tracking hounds. Mara turned and ran. The wasteland was worse than she'd imagined. The ground was uneven, broken by jagged rocks and deep cracks that threatened to twist her ankle with every step. The air tasted like ash and something chemical, something wrong. Nothing grew here, no grass, no flowers, just the occasional twisted tree that looked more dead than alive. And it was cold. So cold her breath misted in front of her face and her fingers went numb within minutes. Mara stumbled through the darkness, using moonlight to navigate, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the hunters. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed. The heat from earlier had finally faded, leaving her weak and shaking. She had to stop, had to rest. She found a shallow ravine and dropped into it, pressing her back against the cold stone. Above, she could still see the torchlight moving through the wasteland, spreading out in a wide net. They weren't giving up. Think! Think! She couldn't outrun them forever. She was already exhausted, and they were trained hunters with supplies and weapons, and probably tracking dogs. The bond pulsed in her chest. Kael. She could feel him back at the Citadel, his emotions bleeding through the connection. Rage, guilt, frustration. He was fighting with someone, probably Veyron. His voice raised, demanding to know where they'd taken her. But he wasn't coming. He'd let them take her in the first place. He'd chosen the crown over the bond. "You're nothing," he'd said. The memory burned. Mara closed her eyes and tried to shut him out, but the bond wouldn't let her. It pulled and ached and demanded attention, a constant reminder of what she'd lost before she'd ever really had it. A sound made her freeze. Footsteps. Close. Too close. She held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the shadows of the ravine. 2 hunters appeared at the ridge above, their torches casting long shadows. Both were betas, dressed in thick fur cloaks and carrying crossbows. "Tracks end here," one of them said, crouching to examine the ground. "She can't have gone far. Omega in heat, no supplies, middle of the wasteland. She'll be dead by morning anyway. Council wants her alive. Something about bloodline research." The first hunter snorted. "Since when does the council care about research? They just want to make sure she can't bond with anyone else. Can't have some random Omega disrupting the breeding programs." "True, though I heard she already bonded, with the king himself." "Bullshit. King's been refusing bonds for years. Veyron's had a fit about it. I'm telling you what I heard. Unsanctioned bond. Formed naturally. That's why they want her so bad. She proved it's still possible without the rituals." The second hunter swore. "If that gets out, the whole system collapses. Every Omega will refuse suppressants, wait for a natural bond. Which is why we find her. Dead or alive, she disappears. The bond story dies with her." They started descending into the ravine. Mara's heart hammered. She looked around frantically. The ravine was a dead end, sheer walls on 3 sides, only one way out, and the hunters were blocking it. "I'm trapped." The first hunter started descending, boots scraping against stone. He was maybe 20 feet away. Then 15, then 10. Mara's hand closed around a rock. It wasn't much. Wouldn't do anything against crossbows. But it was all she had. Wait. The thought came from somewhere deep, somewhere instinctive. Not her voice, something older. "Don't fight. Disappear." She didn't understand it, but she didn't have time to question. She pressed herself flat against the ravine wall, barely breathing, and willed herself to become invisible. Not literally. She knew that was impossible. But maybe if she was quiet enough, still enough, insignificant enough. The hunter reached the bottom of the ravine, torch held high. He looked right at her, and then he looked away. "Nothing here," he called up to his partner. "Just rocks." Mara stared at him in shock. He was less than 10 feet away, looking directly at where she stood. The torchlight should have illuminated her completely, but his eyes slid past her like she wasn't there, like she didn't exist. What the hell? The hunter turned, examining the other side of the ravine, his back now to her. She could see the crossbow strapped to his back, the knife at his belt. She could have reached out and touched him, but he had no idea she was there. "Check the next one," the second hunter called down. "She's got to be close. The hounds picked up her scent near here." The first hunter climbed back up, grumbling about wasting time. They moved on, their voices fading into the distance. Mara waited until she couldn't hear them anymore, then slowly let out the breath she'd been holding. Her whole body was shaking. What had just happened? She looked down at her hands. They looked normal, solid, real. She could see them clearly in the moonlight. But somehow, for just a moment, she'd been invisible. Not physically. The hunter would have bumped into her if he'd gotten closer, but perceptually, like her presence had simply slipped out of notice. The old blood, Ashir had said. Power they spent centuries trying to erase. Mara climbed out of the ravine on trembling legs and kept moving, her mind racing with questions she had no answers for. By dawn, she'd put several miles between herself and the hunters. The wasteland stretched endlessly in all directions, gray and lifeless under a pale sun that provided light but no warmth. Mara's stomach cramped with hunger. Her throat was raw with thirst. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but stopping meant dying. She found a stream, if you could call it that. More like a trickle of water running through a crack in the rock. The water looked cloudy, possibly contaminated, but she was desperate enough not to care. She cupped her hands and drank. The water tasted metallic and wrong, like drinking liquid rust, but it was wet, and that was all that mattered. As she drank, movement caught her eye. A figure, watching from behind a dead tree about 50 yards away. Mara froze, water dripping from her hands. The figure stepped out slowly. A woman, maybe in her 40s, dressed in layered rags and furs that had been patched and repatched so many times it was impossible to tell what they'd originally been. Her hair was wild, streaked with gray, her face weathered by exposure, but her eyes were sharp and assessing. An Omega. Mara could tell by the way she moved, the wariness in her posture, the way she kept her distance. "You're from the Citadel," the woman said. Not a question. Mara stood slowly, ready to run. So? So you won't last another day out here alone? The woman looked her up and down, taking in Mara's kitchen uniform, her lack of supplies, the way she was already shivering. No gear, no skills. Probably never spent a night outside walls in your life. "I'll manage. Will you?" The woman smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was the smile of someone who'd watched people die and stopped caring. "The wasteland doesn't care how determined you are, girl. It'll kill you anyway. Cold tonight will drop below freezing. You've got no shelter, no way to make fire. You'll be dead by morning. What do you want?" "Depends." The woman tilted her head. "Why'd they throw you out? Throw you?" Mara hesitated, but what did it matter now? Everyone who wanted her dead already knew where she was. "I bonded. With the king. Without permission." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "Well, that explains the hunting party and the wyvern." She paused. "You're Sarah's daughter." Mara's heart stopped. "You knew my mother?" Everyone out here knew Sarah. She spent 3 years in the wasteland before the Citadel dragged her back. The woman's expression softened slightly. "She talked about you. Hoped you'd never end up out here. Guess that didn't work out." Mara's voice cracked. "They told me she died giving birth to me." "She did. Just not the way you think." The woman sighed. "I'm Rena, and you need to come with me before those hunters circle back." "Where?" "Somewhere you won't die in the next hour. Move." Mara didn't trust her, but she didn't have better options, and if this woman had known her mother... She followed, looked up. Rena's camp was hidden in a box canyon about 2 miles north, tucked into a formation of rocks that provided some shelter from the wind. Calling it a camp was generous. It was more like a collection of lean-tos cobbled together from salvaged wood, torn fabric, and whatever else could be scavenged from the wasteland. A small fire pit sat in the center, currently dark. Storage areas were carved into the canyon walls, protected from the elements. As they approached, other figures emerged from the shelters, all Omegas. Mara counted 6 of them, ranging from teenage to elderly, all watching her with expressions that mixed suspicion with curiosity. They looked hard, weathered, like the wasteland had filed down everything soft and left only the core. "Found this one by the eastern stream," Rena announced. "Fresh from the Citadel, bonded to the king, if you can believe it." Murmurs rippled through the group. "The king?" A younger Omega, maybe 17, stepped forward. She had burn scars running down one side of her face. "The council let a king bond?" "They didn't let anything," Mara said quietly. "It just happened. And they sent you here for it." An older woman, her face scarred and her eyes hard as flint, spat into the dirt. "Typical. They send all of us here. Anyone who doesn't fit their perfect little system. Anyone who might upset their control." Mara looked around the camp, understanding dawning. "You're all rejected," Rena finished. "Relocated. Erased. Whatever pretty word they used, it means the same thing. They dumped us in the wasteland and expected us to die. Expected the environment or the ferals or simple starvation to do their dirty work for them. But you didn't. No." Rena's smile was sharp. "We're stubborn like that. Turns out when you stop dosing Omegas with suppressants, stop beating the fight out of them, they're a lot harder to kill than the council thinks." The scarred woman crossed her arms. "So what makes you special? Why should we waste resources on you?" "I'm not asking. You're here. That's asking." The woman stepped closer, and Mara could see the barely healed claw marks across her shoulders. "We've got limited supplies, limited food, limited everything. Every mouth we feed is a risk. Every person we take in is someone who might get us all killed. So tell me, what do you bring to the table?" Mara met her gaze. "I don't know yet, but I can learn. I can work, and I won't be dead weight. Learning takes time we might not have." The woman looked at Rena. This is a mistake. She's got hunters all over the wasteland looking for her. She'll bring them right to us. They're already looking, Rena pointed out. Have been for years. One more Omega won't change that. One bonded to the king will. You know it will. Maybe. Rena studied Mara with an unreadable expression. But she's got something the rest of us don't. What? A bonded king who's probably tearing the citadel apart, looking for her right now. A king who, if the bond is strong enough, will do stupid things. Make mistakes. Show weakness. The camp went silent. Mara's chest tightened. He's not looking for me. He let them take me. He chose the crown over the bond. You sure about that? Rena gestured to Mara's chest, where beneath her shirt, she knew the bond mark would be forming, a pattern of silvery lines that marked her as claimed. Because that bond doesn't care what he wants. It'll pull at him every second you're gone, drive him half mad, make him weak, make him vulnerable. The scarred woman's eyes narrowed. Weak enough to make mistakes. Weak enough to be exploited, Rena agreed. Understanding crystallized, cold and uncomfortable. You want to use me, as leverage against the citadel. We want to survive, the scarred woman said flatly. And if having you here gives us an advantage, if your bond makes the king vulnerable, makes the council nervous, creates chaos in their perfect little system, then yes, we'll use it. We'll use anything we can get. I'm not a weapon. No, you're a tool. There's a difference. The woman turned away. She stays, for now. But if she becomes more liability than asset, she's gone. Understood? The group dispersed, returning to their various tasks and shelters. Rena stayed, watching Mara with an expression that was hard to read. Welcome to the rejects, she said finally. Try not to get us all killed. The next 3 days were the hardest of Mara's life. Rena put her to work immediately, hauling water from the contaminated stream and filtering it through makeshift systems of charcoal and sand, gathering what little edible plant life existed in the wasteland, helping repair the shelters with salvaged materials. The work was brutal. Mara's hands, soft from years of kitchen work, blistered within hours. Then the blisters popped and bled. Then they calloused over, rough and painful. Her muscles screamed. She fell into her bedroll each night too exhausted to even dream. But she learned. The scarred woman, whose name was Kira, taught her which plants were safe and which would kill her within hours. How to recognize the subtle differences between root vegetables that provided nutrition and ones that induced paralysis. The wasteland tries to kill you, Kira said, showing Mara a plant with innocent-looking purple flowers. Everything here is either poisonous or predatory. Your job is to learn the difference before it's too late. The teenage Omega with the burn scars, Sal, showed her how to set snares for the small, twisted creatures that lived in the wasteland, things that looked vaguely like rabbits but moved wrong, their joints bending at unnatural angles, their eyes too large and reflective in the dark. The first time Mara caught one, she almost threw up. It writhed in the snare, making sounds that were too human, its body contorting in ways that defied anatomy. Don't think about it, Sal said, showing her how to kill it quickly. It's meat. That's all that matters. The meat tasted like ash and metal, tough and stringy. Mara forced it down anyway. Because the alternative was starvation, and every night the bond pulled at her. She could feel Kyle in the citadel, his presence like a constant ache in her chest. Some nights she felt his rage, arguments with the council that turned into screaming matches, furniture being thrown, guards being dismissed for trying to stop him from doing something reckless. Other nights she felt his despair, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe, like he was drowning and couldn't find the surface. But he never came. And slowly, Mara stopped expecting him to. On the 4th day, Rena took her on a supply run to one of the abandoned settlements scattered throughout the wasteland. Citadel sends people out here to die, Rena explained as they walked, both of them carrying salvage bags made from stitched-together scraps. But before they do, they strip the settlements of anything useful. Medicine, tools, weapons. Except they're not very thorough. You learn to scavenge, learn to find what they missed. The settlement was a collection of collapsed buildings, half buried in ash and slowly being reclaimed by the wasteland. Mara followed Rena through the ruins, searching for anything salvageable, metal that could be sharpened into tools, fabric that could be repurposed, containers that could hold water. "Why do you stay?" Mara asked, pulling a rusted but still functional knife from beneath a fallen beam. "If the wasteland is this dangerous, why not try to go somewhere else?" "Anywhere else? Like where?" Rena didn't look up from the pile of debris she was sorting through. "South is controlled by the Citadel. They'd kill us on sight. East is the ocean. Can't survive there without boats, and we've got no way to build them. West is mountains that'll kill you faster than the wasteland. Peaks so high the air gets thin and the cold goes bone deep." "And north?" Rena's hand stilled. "North is where the old magic still lives, where things worse than wyverns hunt, where the wasteland gives way to something older and darker. No one who goes north comes back." Ashir said something about old blood. "About my bloodline." Rena's head snapped up. "The wyvern spoke to you?" "You know about Ashir?" "Everyone in the wasteland knows about the black wyvern. It's been circling the northern border for years, keeping the worst things at bay. But it's never bonded, not since—" Rena's eyes widened with realization. "Not since your mother." Mara's heart stopped. "What?" "Your mother, Sarah. She was out here years ago, before you were born. She had the old blood too, stronger than anyone had seen in generations. Could disappear like smoke. Could call to the wild things and they'd obey. Could—" Rena shook her head, her expression troubled. "The Citadel took her back. We never knew why. Just that one day she was here, leading half the outcasts in the wasteland, and the next she was gone, dragged back to the Citadel in chains. They told me she died giving birth to me." "She did, but not the way you think." Rena stood, brushing ash from her clothes. "The council doesn't like loose ends, Mara. If your mother had power, real power, they wouldn't have just let her die. They would have used her, studied her, tried to figure out where that power came from so they could eliminate it from the bloodline entirely." Mara's hands trembled. "You're saying they killed her, deliberately." "I'm saying the council has been controlling Omega bloodlines for generations, breeding out anything they can't control, anything that threatens their system. Your mother was an anomaly, powerful, charismatic, capable of uniting the outcasts, and now you are too." "I'm not powerful. I can't even—" "You made yourself invisible to trained hunters. You bonded with a king through sheer force of nature, no ritual required. And you survived 4 days in the wasteland when most Citadel Omegas would be dead in 4 hours. Rena's gaze was steady. "You're more than you know. The question is whether you'll figure it out in time." Before Mara could respond, a sound cut through the air. A howl. Long, mournful, and entirely too close. Rena's face went pale. "Run!" "What?" "Ferals! Run!" They sprinted back toward the canyon, but the howling multiplied. 3, 4, 5 distinct voices echoing across the wasteland, coming from different directions. Mara risked a glance back and immediately wished she hadn't. They looked like wolves, but wrong. Too large, their proportions distorted, limbs too long and joints that bent backward. Their eyes glowed red in the dim light, and their mouths were full of too many teeth, crammed into jaws that didn't close properly. Omegas who'd gone feral, lost themselves completely to the wasteland's corruption, their bodies warping to match their fractured minds, and they were fast. Faster than anything that size should be. Rena fired a makeshift crossbow, hitting one in the shoulder. It stumbled but didn't stop, didn't even slow down. "The canyon!" Rena gasped, her breathing labored. "We can bottleneck them there." One of the ferals lunged from the side, catching Rena's leg in its jaws. She went down hard, screaming, her crossbow flying from her hands. Mara skidded to a stop. "Run!" every instinct screamed. "Save yourself! She's dead anyway." But she'd spent her whole life running, hiding, being invisible, letting others suffer while she stayed safe. And look where it had gotten her. Alone, powerless, erased. She grabbed the rusted knife from her belt and charged back toward Rena. The feral released Rena's leg and turned toward Mara, lips pulled back in a snarl that revealed gums black with rot. It was massive up close, easily twice her size, muscles corded beneath matted fur and exposed patches of scaled skin. Mara didn't stand a chance. She knew it. The feral knew it. But as the creature lunged, jaws wide, something inside her snapped. The same thing that had made her invisible in the ravine. The old blood. The power she didn't understand and couldn't control. But this time, she didn't disappear. She exploded. Light burst from her skin, blinding, white-hot, searing. The feral recoiled with a shriek that was more pain than sound, its red eyes squeezing shut, its body convulsing. The other creatures scattered, their howls turning to whimpers as they fled into the wasteland, unable to bear the light. Mara stood in the center of it, light pouring from her hands, her chest, seeming to radiate from her very bones. She could feel it burning through her, too much, too strong, like her body was trying to contain a star and failing. She had absolutely no idea what she was doing or how to stop it. Rena stared at her from the ground, eyes wide with shock and something that looked like fear. "Mara." The light intensified. Mara screamed, the power tearing through her, and then darkness, complete and absolute. She felt herself falling, felt the hard ground rushing up to meet her, and then felt nothing at all. She woke in the camp, lying on her bedroll with every Omega in the settlement gathered around her in a tight circle. Kira stood closest, her scarred face unreadable. "You've been out for 6 hours." Mara tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her skull like someone was driving nails into her brain. "What happened?" "You tell us." Kira crossed her arms. "One minute you're about to be feral food, the next you're glowing like a miniature sun and scaring off a whole pack. Rena says you've never done that before." "I haven't. I didn't mean to." "Doesn't matter what you meant." Kira's voice was hard. "What matters is what you are. And what you are is dangerous. To yourself and everyone around you." "I'm not." "You're a weapon they couldn't control. That's why they wanted you dead. That's why your mother was eliminated." Kira looked at the other Omegas gathered around. "And now we have to decide if keeping her here is worth the risk." "She saved Rena," Sal pointed out quietly, her burn-scarred face troubled. "This time. What about next time when she can't control it and takes us all out? What happens when that light doesn't stop? When it burns through everything, including us?" "I won't." "You don't know what you'll do. That's the problem." Kira's jaw clenched. "The Citadel already hunts us. But if they know she's here, if they know what she can do, that she's manifesting her mother's power, they won't just send hunters. They'll send an army. They'll burn this entire section of the wasteland to ash just to eliminate her." Rena, her leg bandaged and propped up, spoke from where she sat near the fire. "She's not the enemy, Kira. No. But she makes us a target. A bigger target than we already are." Kira's expression was conflicted, torn between practicality and something that might have been compassion. "I'm not saying throw her out. I'm saying we need to be realistic about what having her here means." "It means we have leverage," Rena said. "It means we have something the Citadel actually fears. It means we have a target painted on our backs." As if summoned by her words, a sound rolled across the wasteland. Drums, deep, rhythmic, getting closer. Mara's blood ran cold. She forced herself to her feet, ignoring the way the world tilted and stumbled to the canyon's edge. On the horizon, moving steadily toward them like an approaching storm, was a force that made the hunting party look like a scouting mission. Dozens of soldiers, war machines pulled by massive draft horses. Banners bearing the Citadel's crest, black and silver, snapping in the wind. And at the front, mounted on a massive black horse, his gray eyes fixed on the canyon with an intensity that made her chest ache. Kyle. He'd finally come, but not to save her. To destroy everything in his path until he got her back. The bond flared in her chest, so strong it nearly drove her to her knees. She could feel his determination, his fury, his absolute refusal to accept that she was gone. And beneath it all, something darker, possession. He wasn't coming to rescue her. He was coming to reclaim what he believed was his. Kira appeared beside her, taking in the approaching army. "Well, that answers that question." "What question?" "Whether the king would come for you." Kira's voice was grim. "And whether we're all about to die because of it." The drums grew louder, each beat vibrating through Mara's chest like a second heartbeat competing with the bond. She watched the army approach, a dark line spreading across the gray wasteland, and felt something inside her fracture. He'd come for her. After everything, after letting them take her, after choosing the crown over the bond. He'd come. How many? Rena appeared on Mara's other side, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch, her bandaged leg dragging. Kira's eyes were sharp, assessing. She'd spent years surviving out here, learning to calculate odds in seconds. 50 soldiers, maybe more. War machines. Siege equipment. She paused, her scarred face grim. He's not here to negotiate. He's here to take her back, Sal said quietly, her burn-scarred fingers gripping a crude spear. Whether we want to give her up or not. Mara's hands clenched into fists. I won't let you die for me. Little late for that. Kira's voice was flat, matter of fact. The moment you manifested, the moment that light tore through the wasteland like a beacon, you put every Omega in this camp at risk. He knows you're here now, they all know, and they're not going to stop coming. Then I'll go to him. I'll surrender myself and you'll do nothing. Rena grabbed Mara's arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who could barely stand. You go out there. He takes you back to the Citadel, and everything your mother died for, everything we've built out here, every small freedom we've clawed back from their control, it all means nothing. My mother died in childbirth, that's what they told me. Your mother died fighting. Rena's grip tightened until it hurt. She led the largest Omega uprising the wasteland has ever seen. For 3 years, she united outcasts from every corner of this godforsaken place, taught them to fight back, showed them they didn't have to accept what the Citadel decided for them. She was a force of nature, Mara. And when the Council finally caught her, when they dragged her back to the Citadel in chains, she made them promise one thing, that her daughter would live, that you would have a chance she never got. Mara's throat closed. I didn't ask for that. I didn't ask for any of this. No one asks for the world they're born into. But here you are anyway. Rena released her, swaying slightly on her crutch. So the question is, what are you going to do with it? Hide like you've been doing your whole life, or fight? Below, the army had stopped just outside crossbow range, forming a defensive perimeter. The soldiers moved with disciplined precision, shields locked in tight formation, weapons ready. The war machines, massive crossbows mounted on wheeled platforms that required 3 men to operate, were positioned and loaded with bolts thick as tree branches. And Kael sat on his horse at the front, perfectly still, waiting. The bond pulled so hard, Mara had to grab the rock wall to stay upright. She could feel his presence like gravity itself had shifted, like he was the center of everything and she was being drawn inexorably toward him. He's going to give us a choice, Kira said, watching the army with the calculating gaze of a survivor. Surrender her peacefully, or he takes her by force and kills anyone who gets in his way. That's not a choice. No, but maybe we can buy time. Make him think we're negotiating while we prepare. Kira turned to the others gathered behind them. Get everyone armed, everything we have. If they breach the canyon, we make them bleed for every inch. The Omegas scattered, moving with practiced efficiency born of years living on the edge of death. Within minutes, the small camp had transformed into something resembling a defensive position. Crossbows appeared from hidden caches carved into the canyon walls. Makeshift spears with fire-hardened tips. Jars of what smelled like pitch mixed with something chemical, probably salvaged from old Citadel supply dumps. It wouldn't be enough, Mara knew it, they all knew it. But they were going to fight anyway, because what else was there? A horn sounded from the army below. A single clear note that cut through the wind and echoed off the canyon walls. Then Kael's voice, amplified somehow, probably one of those mechanical devices the Citadel used for battlefield commands, echoed across the wasteland. I know you can hear me. Mara's breath caught. She hadn't heard his voice, actually heard it out loud, not felt it through the bond, since that moment in the Citadel corridor when he'd let them take her. When he'd turned his back while they dragged her to the cells. It sounded different now, rougher, strained, like he hadn't slept in days. I'm not here for them, Kael continued, his amplified voice carrying clearly despite the distance. I'm here for what's mine. Send her out, and the rest of you can live. You have my word. Kira laughed, sharp and bitter. Like we'd believe that. Like any Omega would believe a promise from an Alpha King. He means it. Mara could feel the truth of it through the bond. A complicated tangle of sincerity and desperation. He doesn't care about you, any of you. He just wants you. Rena's expression was grim, which makes you valuable. A bargaining chip, and incredibly dangerous to keep around. Below, Kael waited. The army stood in perfect formation, silent and disciplined. When no response came from the canyon, Kyle spoke again, and this time there was an edge to his voice. "I'll give you 1 hour. After that, we come in, and I won't be able to control what happens to anyone who stands in my way." The threat hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Kira turned to Mara, her scarred face unreadable. "Can you fight him? Through the bond?" "What do you mean?" "You're connected to him. Can you use that connection as a weapon? Hurt him? Distract him? Make him vulnerable?" Mara shook her head, feeling useless and ashamed. "I don't know how. I don't even know how the bond works, much less how to weaponize it. Everything that's happened, the invisibility, the light, it's all been accidents. I can't control any of it." "Then you're useless to us." Kira's words were blunt, brutal, but not wrong. The accusation stung because it was true. Mara was useless, powerless despite the supposed old blood, a liability that was going to get everyone killed, just like she'd always been. No. The thought came sharp and sudden, cutting through the self-pity. Not anymore. She'd manifested power against the ferals, light that drove them back, made them flee in terror. And before that, invisibility that fooled trained hunters, made her unnoticeable even when they were looking right at her. The old blood was real. She just had to figure out how to access it deliberately instead of waiting for panic and desperation to trigger it by accident. "I need to try something," Mara said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Try what?" "I don't know yet, but give me the hour Kyle offered. If I can't figure something out by then, if I can't find a way to help..." She met Kira's hard gaze. "I'll surrender. I'll go to him. You'll have your chance to scatter and run." "Run where?" "He'll hunt us down anyway. We're witnesses to what you can do. The council can't let us live with that knowledge." "Maybe, but at least you'll have a chance. Better than dying here for nothing." Kira studied her for a long moment, weighing options, calculating odds. Finally, she nodded. 1 hour. Don't waste it." Mara found a quiet corner of the canyon, away from the frantic preparations, and sat with her back against the cold stone wall. She closed her eyes and reached for the bond. It was always there, humming beneath her skin like a live wire, but she'd spent the last 4 days trying to ignore it, trying to suppress it the way she'd suppressed everything else in her life. Now she dove in head first, following the silver thread that connected her consciousness to Kael's. His emotions hit her like a physical blow. Rage. So much rage it felt like fire burning under her skin. But beneath it, fear. Raw and visceral and almost childlike. The fear of losing something before he'd even had a chance to understand what it was. And deeper still, buried under layers of trained control, loneliness. A yawning emptiness that had existed long before she'd entered his life. He's been alone, she realized with sudden clarity. For years. Decades, maybe. Surrounded by hundreds of people who want something from him, but no one who actually sees him as a person instead of a crown. The bond had changed that. For one brief, chaotic moment in the Citadel corridor, when her scent had flooded his senses and the connection had snapped into place, he'd felt seen, connected, whole. And then she'd been ripped away, dragged to the cells, and that brief moment of wholeness had shattered. "Is that why you came?" she thought, knowing intellectually that he couldn't hear her thoughts through the bond, but feeling like maybe he could sense the question anyway. "Because you can't stand being alone again? Because for one moment you felt less empty and now you'll do anything to get that feeling back?" The bond pulsed in response, responding to her focused attention. She felt Kael shift below in the army formation, felt his awareness snap to her location like a compass finding true north. He knew she was reaching through the bond, and he reached back. The connection deepened, became a two-way conduit instead of just her receiving his emotional bleed-through. Suddenly, she could sense more than just his current feelings. She could glimpse his thoughts, his memories flickering at the edges of her awareness like shadows on a wall. A childhood spent being groomed for kingship, every friend chosen for political advantage, every relationship carefully calculated and managed by handlers, every moment of genuine emotion ruthlessly suppressed because kings didn't have the luxury of feelings, of weakness, of being human. And then her scent in the Citadel corridor, breaking through years of careful control in an instant. "Mine!" his instinct had screamed, primal and undeniable. Finally, something that's actually mine. And the council had taken her. Stolen her, thrown her away like garbage. Mara pulled back from the connection, gasping, her heart racing. The bond snapped partially closed like a door being pulled shut, but not quite latching. She understood now why he'd come, why he'd brought an army, why he was willing to kill to get her back. Not because he loved her. They barely knew each other, had exchanged maybe 50 words total, but because the bond had given him something he'd never had before, and the council had stolen it. And kings didn't accept theft. Kings didn't accept losing. This wasn't about her at all. It was about power, control, ownership, possession. And that realization crystallized something in Mara's chest. Something cold and hard and absolutely certain. She wasn't going back. Not to be his possession. Not to be the council's research subject. Not to be anyone's tool or weapon or symbol or anything except herself. If she had power, if the old blood was real and manifesting, she would use it, not to hide anymore, to break free. She stood and walked to the edge of the canyon, looking down at the army below. At Kael, sitting perfectly still on his massive black horse, radiating authority and barely controlled violence. And she opened the bond wide, dropping every barrier, letting him feel exactly what she was feeling. "You want me?" she sent, knowing he'd sensed the challenge even if he couldn't hear the actual words. "Then come and get me. But I won't make it easy, and I won't go quietly." Below, Kael's entire body went rigid. His head snapped up, eyes locking onto her position with laser focus. And then he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just spotted prey trying to run. He raised his hand, gave a sharp signal, and the army moved forward. The attack came faster than expected, more coordinated than anything the Omegas had faced before. The soldiers hit the canyon entrance like a battering ram, shields locked in tight formation that protected them from the arrows raining down from above. They advanced in waves, each one covering the other, professional and disciplined. Kira's people fought like cornered animals, desperate, vicious, using every advantage the terrain provided. They dropped rocks from above, fired arrows at exposed joints in armor, used their knowledge of the canyon's layout to strike and retreat. But they were outnumbered 10-1, and it showed. Mara watched from her elevated position, her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood from her palms, fighting the urge to run down there and help. She'd never fought before, didn't know how to use a weapon, didn't know tactics or strategy. She'd just be in the way, just get someone killed trying to protect her. But the light, she looked down at her trembling hands, remembering the explosion of power that had driven off the ferals. The barrier of light she'd held, if only briefly, before collapsing. If she could do that again, control it somehow, aim it precisely instead of just exploding in all directions. You don't know how, the rational part of her mind argued. You'll just hurt everyone, friend and enemy alike. You'll kill the people you're trying to protect. Below, the soldiers breached the first defensive line through sheer weight of numbers. 3 Omegas went down, overwhelmed, disappearing under shields and boots. Sal was among the defenders, her burn-scarred face twisted in a snarl of defiance as she swung a crude club at an armored soldier twice her size. She didn't stand a chance. The soldier's sword came up, angling for a killing blow, and Ashir's roar split the sky like thunder. The black wyvern dove from the clouds like a thunderbolt made flesh, talons extended, wings spread so wide they seemed to blot out the pale sun. It crashed into the soldier formation with devastating force, scattering armored men like a child kicking over toy soldiers, and positioned itself between the army and the canyon entrance. Bodies flew, shields crumpled. The organized formation dissolved into chaos. "I told you!" Ashir's voice filled Mara's head, vibrating through her skull. "When you truly need me, when your life hangs by a thread, I'll come." The bond calls, and I answer. Relief flooded through her so intense it made her dizzy. "Ashir, thank you. Don't thank me yet, little Omega. I can hold them for a time, but not forever. Wyverns are strong, but arrows and ballista bolts can still kill us. You need to decide. Fight or flee. Stand or run. But decide now, because this window won't stay open long." Kael's voice cut through the chaos, amplified and commanding. "Hold! Hold your positions!" The soldiers froze. Weapons still raised but no longer advancing, staring at the wyvern with expressions ranging from raw terror to religious awe. Some of them were young, probably conscripts who'd never seen anything like this outside of stories. Kael dismounted his horse with fluid grace, moving forward on foot until he stood just beyond Ashir's reach. He showed no fear, though he had to know the wyvern could kill him in seconds. "Mara!" He didn't shout, but his voice carried across the battlefield. "Enough of this. People are dying. Your people. My people. Good people who didn't ask to be part of this mess. For what? A bond neither of us asked for? A connection that formed by accident? You let them take me." The words tore out of her throat, raw and ragged. "You stood there in that corridor and let them drag me away like I was nothing. I had no choice. You always have a choice. Not when I'm king." Kale's control cracked, raw emotion bleeding through. "Not when the council holds the real power and I'm just a figurehead. They dress up and parade around when they need someone to sign their decrees. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to be bonded to someone they'd immediately try to eliminate? Then why come now? Why bring an army? Why tear through the wasteland hunting me down if you're just their puppet? Because I'm done pretending!" His voice was almost a roar now, alpha power bleeding into every word. "Done playing their games, done being what they want me to be instead of who I am. The bond broke something in me, Mara. Something I didn't even know was broken. It showed me what I've been missing, what I've been denying myself. And I won't give it back. I won't give you back. I'm not yours to give or take. The bond says otherwise. The bond is wrong." Kale recoiled like she'd physically struck him. For a moment, he just stared at her, and through their connection, she felt his emotions shift, rage giving way to something that looked like genuine hurt. Mara stepped forward, moving to the very edge of the canyon where everyone could see her clearly. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out anyway. "You don't want me. You don't even know me. You want what I represent, freedom from the council's control, a connection they can't manage or manipulate. But I'm not a symbol. I'm not a tool. I'm not a cure for your loneliness. I'm a person, and I'm done being used by people who only care about what I can do for them. I'm not using you. Yes, you are. Just like the council used me, kept me invisible and controlled. Just like these Omegas want to use me as leverage against the Citadel. Everyone wants something from me. My power, my bond, my bloodline. But no one actually cares about who I am underneath all that." Silence fell across the battlefield like a physical weight. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Kale's jaw worked, muscles clenching. Then quietly, in a voice stripped of all command, "What do you want?" The question caught her completely off guard. No one had ever asked her that. Not once in her entire life. What did she want? A week ago, she would have said safety, anonymity, to be left alone to live a small, invisible life where no one noticed her and she could just survive. But that girl was dead. Erased the moment the suppressants had failed and her true nature had surfaced. There was no going back to invisibility. "I want to understand what I am," Mara said slowly, working through the thoughts as she spoke them. "I want to know why the council fears me so much that they'll kill their own king's bondmate. Why my mother died. What this power is that lives in my blood, and why they spent generations trying to eliminate it from existence. Then come back to the Citadel. We'll find those answers together. I can protect you from the council. I can—" "In the Citadel? Where Veyron and his council will dissect me the moment you're distracted? Where they have all the power and you're just a crown they parade around?" "I won't let them touch you." "You already did." The words were quiet, but they landed like stones dropping into still water. "Once. You'll do it again when the pressure gets too high. When they threaten something you care about more than a bond you never wanted in the first place." Kale's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "That's not fair. None of this is fair." Behind Kale, one of his commanders stepped forward, a hard-faced man with gray in his beard and scars that spoke of decades of service. "Your Majesty, we're losing daylight. If we're going to take the canyon by force, we need to move now before—" "I'm not taking anything by force." Kale's voice was firm, carrying the weight of command again. He turned to address his entire army. "Stand down, all of you. Lower your weapons. We're not here to conquer. We're here to— He stopped, seeming to realize he didn't actually know how to finish that sentence. The commander's face darkened. "Sire, the council's orders were explicitly clear." "I don't care about the council's orders." "Your Majesty." "I said stand down. That's a direct order from your king." But the soldiers didn't move. They looked at each other uncertainly, at their commanders instead of their king. at the canyon full of outcasts and the wyvern blocking their path, and Mara realized with cold, creeping certainty that Kael had made a fatal tactical error. He'd brought an army loyal to the council, not to him. The commander drew his sword with a metallic ring that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. By order of the Council of Frosthold, Alpha King Kael Draven is hereby relieved of command for refusal to execute lawful orders and for being compromised by an illegal bond. Men, seize him. 4 guards moved toward Kael from behind, weapons drawn and ready. Kael's eyes widened with genuine shock. This is treason. This is the Council's will. You've been compromised by an illegal bond with an unregistered Omega. You're unfit to rule, unfit to command, and a danger to the stability of the kingdom. Everything happened at once. Kael fought back, his alpha strength allowing him to throw off 2 guards with raw power. But more swarmed him from all sides, overwhelming him through sheer numbers, trained soldiers working in coordinated precision to bring down a stronger opponent. Ashir roared and lunged forward to help, but the war machines fired in unison, massive bolts trailing chains that spread mid-flight like nets. They caught the wyvern's wings, tangling them, the chains weighted with hooks that dug into scales and membrane. More soldiers rushed forward with additional chains, working to drag the creature down. And the army, no longer held back by Kael's increasingly desperate orders, surged forward into the canyon like a flood breaking through a dam. Mara watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment, like she was floating outside her body. This was it, the end. They'd lost before the real fight had even begun. Unless the power, the light. She'd used it against the ferals by accident, pure instinct and panic. What if she could use it deliberately, control it, aim it like a weapon instead of just exploding in all directions? You'll kill everyone, the rational voice in her head warned. Friend and enemy alike. You can't control something you don't understand. You'll just make everything worse. But what choice did she have? She closed her eyes, reached deep inside to that well of power she could feel but didn't understand, and pulled with everything she had. Light exploded from her body, not the blinding flash from before, chaotic and uncontrolled. This was different, more focused, more deliberate. It poured from her hands like liquid fire, spread from her chest in waves, and formed itself into a barrier across the canyon entrance, a wall of light that separated the Omegas from the soldiers. The army recoiled, shields raised against the brightness, unable to advance through the barrier without being burned. Mara held it, gritting her teeth against the strain. It felt like holding back a flood with her bare hands, the power constantly trying to escape her control, to expand and consume everything in reach. Her muscles trembled. Sweat poured down her face despite the cold. Fall back, Kira's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone back, into the tunnels. Move, move, move. The Omegas retreated deeper into the canyon, disappearing into passages Mara hadn't known existed, hidden entrances carved into the rock walls. But Mara couldn't move. If she let go for even a second, if she lost focus or her concentration wavered, the barrier would collapse and the soldiers would pour through. Below, Kael had been forced to his knees by sheer weight of numbers, his hands being bound behind his back with iron chains. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with shock and something that might have been awe, and through the bond she felt his realization. He hadn't known she could do this. Neither had she. The commander stepped forward, staying just beyond where the light barrier touched the ground. Lower it, Omega. You can't hold it forever. Your strength will fail eventually. And when it does, when you collapse from exhaustion, we'll take you. One way or another, you're coming with us. He was right. Already Mara could feel her strength failing. Her vision blurred at the edges, her knees trembled, threatening to buckle. The power was eating through her reserves faster than she could replenish them. She was going to collapse. And when she did, a hand touched her shoulder gently. Rena stood beside her, her face pale but determined, leaning heavily on her crutch. Let go. I can't. We have another way out. The tunnels go deep, deeper than they know. We can escape through the underground passages. Rena's grip on her shoulder tightened, but only if you let go right now and come with us. If you burn yourself out trying to hold this barrier, you'll be unconscious when they take you. What about Ashir? The wyvern can take care of itself. Dragons don't die easy. Rena glanced back at where the creature was still fighting against the chains. But you will if you don't move. Now, Mara. Mara looked down at Kael one last time. He was still watching her, his face a complicated mask of conflicting emotions, anger and betrayal and fear and something else, something that might have been regret or longing or both. Through the bond, she felt his thought as clearly as if he'd spoken it aloud. Don't leave me alone again, please. Her chest tightened painfully, but she'd already made her choice. She let the barrier drop. The light collapsing inward and disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared, grabbed Rena's hand and ran. The tunnels were a claustrophobic labyrinth. Narrow passages carved through solid stone, barely wide enough to walk single file, the ceiling so low Mara had to hunch to avoid cracking her head. She followed Rena through the darkness, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them, boots on stone, shouted orders, the scrape of metal on rock. The other Omegas were already ahead somewhere, moving with practiced ease through passages they clearly knew intimately from years of preparation. How long have these been here? Mara gasped, her lungs burning. Years. We've been preparing for this scenario since the camp was founded. Rena's breathing was labored, her injured leg clearly causing agony with every step. Knew eventually the Citadel would come in force. We just didn't think it'd be because of you. I'm sorry. Save it. Focus on running and not getting caught. They ran through the darkness, Mara keeping one hand on the wall to guide her when the passages turned. The tunnels branched and split and twisted back on themselves in ways that made no logical sense, clearly designed to confuse pursuers. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, then faded, then disappeared entirely. They'd lost them. For now. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Rena called for a stop. The group collapsed in a wider chamber where multiple tunnels converged, gasping for breath, some crying quietly from fear or pain or relief. Kira did a head count in the dim light of a salvaged lantern. We're missing 4. They didn't make it to the tunnels in time, someone said quietly. I saw them go down. Silence fell over the group like a shroud. 4 dead. 4 Omegas who'd survived years in the wasteland, only to die in a battle that wasn't even theirs. Because of her. We can't stay here, Kira said finally, her voice rough. They'll figure out the tunnel system eventually. We need to keep moving deeper. Moving where? Sal asked, her burn-scarred face streaked with dirt and blood from a cut over her eye. We're already past the wasteland boundary. Any deeper, and we're in the true north. There's nothing there but death. There's the old temple, Rena said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at her like she'd suggested they all jump off a cliff. You can't be serious, Kira said flatly. The temple is cursed, a death trap. Everyone who's gone there searching for the old magic has died. Every single one. Everyone who's gone there alone, without the bloodline. Rena looked at Mara. You said you wanted to understand what you are. Where the power comes from. Why the council fears it so much. The temple is where your mother found her answers. It's where the old blood originated, where Omegas first learned to wield power instead of being powerless. Mara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. What temple? I've never heard of any temple. The temple of the first Omega. Built before the Citadel existed, before the Council's consolidated power, before any of the systems that control us now were established. Rena's eyes glittered in the dim lantern light. It's where the old magic still lives, untainted by their suppressants and restrictions. Where Omegas were powerful before they were systematically taught to be weak and submissive. It's also where things hunt that make ferals look like harmless puppies, Kira interjected harshly. Creatures from the old times that never forgot what they were. No one survives the deep north. Not alone. Not in groups. Not ever. No one has tried with someone who carries the full bloodline, Rena countered. Someone the temple might actually recognize and accept instead of killing. Mara's hands trembled violently. This was insane, running deeper into danger instead of trying to find a way to escape, to survive, to get somewhere safe. But escape to where? The Citadel would hunt her to the ends of the earth. The wasteland was no longer safe now that they knew where the camp had been. And if there were real answers at this temple, actual understanding of what she was, what she could do, why the council feared her so much. How far? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rena smiled, and it was the saddest expression Mara had ever seen. 3 days of hard travel through territory that actively tries to kill intruders. If we survive the journey, which most don't. And if we don't survive, then we die on our own terms, fighting for something that matters, instead of cowering in these tunnels waiting for them to smoke us out and drag us back to the citadel in chains. Kira swore viciously. This is suicide. You're asking us to follow you into the deadliest part of the wasteland on a prayer that some ancient temple will magically help instead of killing us all. I'm asking you to choose. Stay here and get hunted down eventually, or take a chance on something that might actually change things. Rena looked around at the exhausted, terrified faces. Anyone who wants to split off, try to make it on their own through the wasteland, now's the time. No judgment, no hard feelings. No one moved. Not because they believed in the plan, Mara realized, but because there were no good options left. Only bad ones, and worse ones. All right then. Rena pushed herself to her feet with visible effort, wincing as weight hit her injured leg. We head north, into the deep, and we pray that whatever's waiting there is more interested in helping than killing. They moved out, leaving the relative safety of the tunnels behind and emerging into a landscape that made the wasteland look hospitable by comparison. The ground here was black glass, ancient volcanic flow that had cooled and cracked into jagged sheets that crunched beneath their feet like broken pottery. The sky was darker, perpetually caught in twilight, even though it should have been midday. The air tasted metallic and sharp, like breathing in powdered iron. And everywhere, a sense of being watched by something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. Mara pulled her threadbare jacket tighter against a cold that seemed to seep into her bones and kept walking. Behind her, far in the distance, she could still feel Kael through the bond, feel his rage as he argued with his captors, probably demanding they release him, feel his determination to find her, to not give up no matter what. But the bond was stretching thin like an overstretched rope. Distance was weakening it with every step she took deeper into the north. Soon, she wouldn't feel him at all, and she told herself that was what she wanted. On the second day, they found the first bodies. 3 Omegas, dead for weeks judging by the state of decomposition, their corpses preserved by the strange cold of the deep north. They'd been torn apart by something with claws longer than Mara's hand and teeth that had left marks in the bones. No one spoke as they passed. That night something howled in the darkness. Not the ferals they'd encountered before. This was deeper, older, and impossibly far away, yet somehow also too close. No one slept. On the third day, as the group stumbled forward on the last of their strength and supplies, the temple appeared. It rose from the black glass plain like a broken tooth thrust up from diseased gums, ancient stone covered in carvings that hurt to look at directly, symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed from the corner of the eye. The structure was massive, easily as large as the citadel's main keep, but where the citadel was all sharp angles and military precision, this was organic, flowing, like it had grown from the earth instead of being built. The entrance was a gaping maw of darkness so complete it seemed almost solid, like looking into the void itself. Rena stopped at the threshold, breathing hard. This is it. Last chance to turn back, last chance to choose a different death. No one turned back. What was the point? They entered together, Mara in the lead because somehow it felt like this was her responsibility. The darkness swallowed them whole, and deep inside the temple, in chambers that hadn't been disturbed in centuries, something ancient stirred, sensing the return of blood it had been waiting generations to taste. Mara stepped forward into the absolute black, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else, the old blood singing in her veins like recognition. And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, since her suppressants had failed and her life had imploded, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, even if it killed her, especially if it killed her. Because at least then she'd die understanding what she was, instead of living as someone else's tool. The darkness inside the temple wasn't just an absence of light. It was something alive, something that pressed against Mara's skin like cold water, testing her, tasting her, deciding whether she belonged or should be destroyed. She took another step forward and heard Rena gasp behind her. "What?" Mara whispered, her voice barely audible in the oppressive silence. "You're glowing." Mara looked down at her hands. Rena was right. A faint silver light was emanating from her skin, not bright enough to illuminate much of the massive chamber, but enough to outline her shape in the darkness. As she watched, fascinated and terrified in equal measure, the glow intensified slightly, responding to her presence in the temple like recognition. "The bloodline," Rena breathed. "The temple recognizes you. It knows what you are." "Or it's marking her for whatever kills intruders," Kira muttered from somewhere behind them, but her voice lacked its usual sharp edge. She sounded uncertain, maybe even afraid. And Kira was never afraid. The group moved deeper into the temple, staying close together in a tight formation, using Mara's faint glow as their only source of light in the absolute darkness. The walls around them were carved with the same writhing symbols from outside, but here they seemed more active, shifting and changing as Mara passed, like they were trying to tell her something in a language she'd forgotten how to read. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. Mara's glow wasn't enough to see the full scope of it, but she could sense the space, high ceilings that disappeared into darkness, so complete it might as well have been infinity. The echo of their footsteps suggesting a room the size of the Citadel's Great Hall or larger. And in the center, something pulsed with its own light. A stone altar, maybe 6 feet tall and twice as wide, carved from some material that looked like obsidian but shimmered with internal colors, deep purples and blues and greens that swirled like oil on water. The light came from within it, steady and rhythmic as a heartbeat, calling to something deep in Mara's chest. "Don't touch it," Kira warned sharply. "Every story about this place says touching the altar is how people die." But Mara was already moving forward, drawn by something she couldn't explain and didn't want to fight. The closer she got to the altar, the brighter her own glow became, until she was lit up like a candle in the darkness, her skin radiating silver light that pushed back the shadows. She reached out her hand. "Mara, wait." Rena's voice was urgent, frightened. Her fingers touched the stone. The world exploded, not physically, but in her mind, in her senses, in every part of her consciousness. Images flooded through her faster than she could process, overwhelming her completely. A time before the Citadel, before the councils, before alphas ruled and omegas submitted. A time when power flowed freely through bloodlines, when omegas could command the elements, speak to ancient creatures, bend reality itself through will alone. A time when they were respected, powerful, free. A war. Alphas growing jealous of omega power, forming alliances, creating suppressants, not the chemical kind that came in vials, but magical bindings woven into the very fabric of society. Rituals performed generation after generation, slowly stripping omegas of their abilities, making them forget what they'd once been. The first omega. Mara couldn't see her face clearly, but she felt her presence like standing in front of a bonfire. Standing in this very temple, making an impossible choice. She could fight, could use her power to destroy the Alpha armies gathering outside the temple walls, but that would mean genocide, would mean becoming the monster they accused her of being, proving that omegas with power were too dangerous to exist. So instead she sealed the power, locked it away deep in bloodlines, dormant but not destroyed, waiting for a time when it might be needed again, when someone worthy would come seeking answers instead of control. "I've been waiting so long," a voice whispered in Mara's mind, ancient and patient and unutterably weary. Not the first omega, she was long dead, centuries gone, but something she'd left behind, an echo. A fragment of consciousness woven into the temple itself, an AI made of magic instead of circuits. So many came seeking power for themselves, to dominate, to control, to take what wasn't freely given. But you seek understanding. You seek truth. "I don't understand any of this," Mara whispered aloud, tears streaming down her face from the intensity of the visions. "You will. But first you must see what you truly are. What they made you forget, what your mother died protecting." The visions shifted, reformed. Her mother, Sarah, standing in this same chamber years ago, touching this same altar, awakening to her full power in a burst of light that had probably been visible for miles across the wasteland, a beacon announcing that the old blood had returned. Sarah leaving the temple, returning to the wasteland camps, using her abilities to unite the scattered omegas. Not through force or coercion, but through hope. Showing them they didn't have to be powerless, didn't have to accept what the Citadel decided for them. The council panicking, sending armies, failing to capture her because she was too strong, too smart, always one step ahead. Until a child. Sarah was pregnant, and suddenly she had something to lose beyond herself, something more precious than freedom or power or revenge. The council's offer, delivered by Veyron himself, surrender peacefully, submit to their control, let them study her power, and the child would be allowed to live. Fight, and they'd hunt the child down the moment it was born and eliminate it, along with every Omega who'd ever followed Sarah. Sarah's choice. Mara's chest constricted painfully as she watched her mother walk back to the citadel in chains, her power suppressed by layers of magical and chemical bindings, her spirit visibly breaking with each step. All to save a daughter she'd never get to hold, a daughter who'd grow up thinking her mother was nothing, nobody, just another low-born Omega who died in childbirth. She loved you, the voice whispered with infinite gentleness. More than freedom, more than power, more than her own life. And they killed her for it anyway. Studied her, dissected her power like she was a laboratory specimen, tried to ensure no child of hers would ever awaken, ever become a threat. But I did awaken. Mara's voice was thick with tears, because love is stronger than their suppressants. Your mother's sacrifice, her willingness to give everything, it created a bond between you that transcended their control. When you needed power most desperately, it answered. Not because of genetics alone, but because of love. That's the secret they never understood. Power rooted in love can't be suppressed, can't be controlled, can only be freely given. The images faded slowly, like waking from a dream. Mara stood alone in the darkness, her hand still on the altar, tears streaming down her face, her entire body shaking. "What am I supposed to do with this?" she asked the emptiness, her voice breaking. "How am I supposed to fight an entire system with just what you've always done?" the voice interrupted gently. "Survive. But now, survive with purpose, with understanding, with the full strength of your bloodline and the knowledge of why it exists." The altar pulsed and power flooded into Mara. Not the chaotic, uncontrolled bursts from before when fear and desperation had triggered random manifestations. This was different, deliberate, controlled. Like a door opening in her mind, revealing rooms she hadn't known existed, each one containing knowledge and ability and understanding. She could feel the Omegas behind her, sense their life forces like candle flames in the dark, each one unique and beautiful and struggling. Could sense the stone around them, ancient and patient and strong. The earth beneath, solid and eternal. The very air they breathed, moving and alive in its own way. Everything was connected by invisible threads of energy, and she could touch those connections, manipulate them if she chose, work with them instead of against them. The old blood wasn't just power, she realized with sudden clarity. It was understanding, unity, the ability to see how everything fit together, people, nature, energy, life itself, and work with those patterns instead of trying to dominate them through force. She pulled her hand back from the altar, gasping for breath like she'd been underwater. The glow around her had stabilized, no longer fluctuating wildly but steady and controlled, responding to her will instead of her fear. She turned slowly to face the others. They stared at her with expressions ranging from awe to fear to something that might have been hope desperately trying not to die. "What happened?" Rena asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were touching the altar for almost an hour. We couldn't reach you, couldn't break the connection. We thought, I saw her, my mother, and the first Omega, and—" Mara struggled to find words adequate to describe what she'd experienced. Everything. Why we were made powerless, how the suppressants work on both magical and chemical levels. What we could be if we weren't constantly drugged and controlled and taught to see ourselves as less than. "And?" Kira's voice was sharp, defensive, like she was bracing for disappointment. "What good does knowing do us? The Citadel still has armies. The Council still has 300 years of consolidated power. We're still just a dozen desperate Omegas hiding in a death trap temple that could collapse on us at any moment. We don't have to hide anymore." Mara's voice came out stronger than she expected, resonant with certainty. "I can teach you. The altar showed me everything, how the suppressants were created, which means it showed me how to break them. Not just in me, but in all of you. In every Omega still trapped in the Citadel's system, believing they're powerless when they're not." Silence fell over the chamber like snow. "You're talking about breaking the foundation of their entire society," Rena said slowly, working through the implications. "If Omegas could access their power again, if they could remember what they used to be, they'd lose control," Sal finished, her burn-scarred face thoughtful and calculating. "Everything they've built for 3 centuries depends on keeping us weak, powerless, believing we need them. If that changes fundamentally, war," Kira said flatly, her scarred face grim. "You're talking about starting a war we can't possibly win. They have numbers, weapons, fortifications. I'm talking about ending one." Mara met her gaze steadily. "A war that's been going on for centuries, that we've been losing because we didn't even know we were fighting it, because we were taught to see our oppression as natural instead of constructed. And you think you can win it? You and your glowing hands and your mystical temple visions against the entire Citadel and every Alpha army they can conscript? No. Not alone. Not even close." Mara took a deep breath. "But with every Omega who's ever been suppressed, controlled, erased, told they were nothing, with every bonded Omega in the Citadel who could choose to resist instead of submit, maybe we have a chance." Before Kira could respond with another objection, a sound echoed through the temple from the entrance corridor. Footsteps. Multiple sets. Heavy boots on stone. Coming closer. They'd been followed. The group tensed immediately, those with weapons drawing them in a soft chorus of metal on leather. Mara's glow dimmed instinctively as she tried to make herself less visible, old habits dying hard. Figures emerged from the darkness of the corridor into the faint light of the chamber. Soldiers. At least 20 of them, maybe more in the shadows, all armed and armored in the Citadel's black and silver. Professional. Disciplined. Dangerous. And at their head, looking like he owned the very stones beneath his feet, Counselor Veyron. He looked exactly as Mara remembered from the Citadel. Silver-haired and cold-eyed, his face carved from ice and contempt, radiating authority and disdain in equal measure. His robes were pristine despite the 3-day journey through the hostile wasteland, like even the dirt and ash were too intimidated to cling to him. "Well," Veyron said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber with perfect diction, "this saves us considerable effort. We expected to hunt you through the wasteland for weeks, following cold trails and false leads. How thoughtful of you to gather in one convenient location." "How did you find us?" Rena demanded, her hand on a crude knife at her belt. "Please." "You left a trail a blind child could follow, broken vegetation, disturbed ash patterns, and that rather spectacular light show when you entered the temple." Veyron's gaze swept the chamber with academic interest, lingering on the altar before settling on Mara. "And when my scouts reported seeing light emanating from the old temple, silver light that matched descriptions from historical records, I knew exactly where you'd gone. Sarah made the same mistake. Hubris, believing the temple would protect her." Mara's hands clenched into fists. "My mother wasn't a mistake. Your mother was a failed experiment conducted under controlled conditions." Veyron smiled, and it was the coldest thing Mara had ever seen. "We gave her freedom deliberately. Let her play at rebellion, unite the outcasts, manifest her powers fully, all to see how far the bloodline could develop without suppressants. The data we collected from her awakening and subsequent capture was invaluable for refining our control methods." "You used her!" Mara's voice shook with rage. "Let her think she was free just so you could study her like an animal. We used a resource that presented itself. That's what rational beings do." Veyron clasped his hands behind his back. "And now you'll provide the second half of our research. A complete picture of the old blood's capabilities across 2 generations. How it awakens, how it functions, how it passes from mother to daughter, and most importantly, how to eliminate it permanently from the genetic line." "You're insane," Kira spat. "I'm practical. The Council has maintained order and stability for 300 years by ensuring Omegas remain in their proper place within society's structure. We won't allow one girl with delusions of power and half-understood temple magic to undo centuries of careful social engineering." Veyron gestured casually to his soldiers. "Take her. Kill anyone who interferes. I only need her alive, not intact." The soldiers moved forward in perfect formation, shields up, weapons ready, and Mara made a choice. She didn't hide, didn't try to disappear or run or plead or negotiate. She reached for the power the temple had given her and pulled with everything she had. Light exploded from her body, but this time she controlled it completely, shaped it with intention and will. Instead of a chaotic blast that would hurt everyone, it formed into a dome around her group, a barrier of solid light that hummed with power, protecting them from the advancing soldiers. The first soldier hit the barrier and recoiled with a cry of pain, his hand blistered where he touched the light. The others stopped, wary now, testing the barrier with their weapons, but unable to penetrate it. Veyron's eyes narrowed with academic interest rather than fear. Impressive control, much faster than your mother achieved. But you can't hold that forever, girl. Your body has limits, and when you collapse from exhaustion, as you inevitably will, I'm not the same terrified girl you threw in a cell, Mara said, her voice steady despite the enormous strain of holding the barrier. I know what I am now, what we all are, what you tried to make us forget, and I'm done being afraid of you. She reached deeper into the power, feeling the connections between everything in the chamber more clearly now. The stone beneath their feet, the air between them, the energy flowing through the soldiers' bodies, the very bonds holding their armor together, metal and leather and thread. And she pulled at those bonds. Armor straps snapped with sounds like whip cracks. Buckles broke and clattered to the floor. Weapons fell from suddenly nerveless fingers as she disrupted the neural connections in their hands. Not permanently, she didn't want to permanently harm anyone, just enough to make them drop what they were holding. The soldiers stumbled back in confusion and growing fear, looking at their hands like they'd betrayed them, several of them crying out in alarm. Veyron's composure cracked for the first time, genuine surprise crossing his face. What are you— that's not— the record said nothing about this level of control. Maybe because you killed everyone who could tell you the truth before they had a chance. Mara took a step forward, and the barrier moved with her like she was inside a bubble. I'm learning, understanding, becoming what your council spent centuries and untold suffering trying to prevent. And you can't stop it. She could feel the temple responding to her now, recognizing her not as an intruder, but as an heir to the first Omega's legacy. The walls began to glow with the same symbols covering them, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, ancient magic awakening after centuries of sleep. The chamber was waking up, and it was angry about 300 years of abandonment and the corruption of everything it had been built to protect. Stones began to shift in the walls. The ceiling groaned ominously. The altar's light intensified until it was almost blinding, and Mara could feel its consciousness brushing against hers, offering more power, more knowledge, more ability if she'd just reach out and take it. You're going to bring the entire structure down on our heads, Veyron shouted over the growing rumble, his perfect composure completely shattered now. You'll kill us all, yourself included. Is that what you want? Suicide? Maybe. Mara smiled without humor. But at least I'll take you with me. At least the council loses its head researcher. At least the Omegas in the Citadel will know someone fought back. Mara, wait! Rena grabbed her arm, her voice urgent. Think about this. If the temple collapses with us inside, it won't. Mara didn't know how she knew that, but the certainty was absolute, coming from the temple itself through their connection. The temple is alive. It's been waiting for someone like me for 300 years. It's not going to destroy itself, and its last chance at fulfillment now. She focused on Veyron, letting the power flow through her voice, giving her words weight and resonance. Leave. Take your soldiers and go back to the Citadel. Tell the council that the old blood has awakened. Tell them their time is ending. Tell them change is coming whether they accept it or not. Or what? You'll kill us all? Veyron's voice dripped with contempt even as his soldiers edged toward the exit. You haven't got the stomach for that kind of violence. You're too weak, too soft, just like your mother. She couldn't kill her enemies when she had the chance either, and look what happened to her. My mother chose love over vengeance, chose protecting her child over destroying her enemies. Mara's eyes blazed with silver light. That's not weakness. That's strength you'll never understand because you've never loved anything more than power. Sentiment, useless sentiment that got her killed. Maybe, but I'm not my mother. Mara's voice dropped, becoming something cold and dangerous. I've learned from her mistakes, and I've run completely out of patience with men like you. She didn't kill them. That would make her what Veyron accused her of being, a monster that needed to be controlled. But she reached into the stone beneath their feet and made it move. The floor buckled and warped, creating a steep slope that sent soldiers sliding helplessly back toward the entrance corridor, their armor clattering, their weapons lost. Veyron grabbed desperately at a pillar to stop himself from falling, his face twisted with rage and something that might have been actual fear. "This isn't over," he snarled, his perfect diction abandoned for raw anger. "You think you've won something here? The Council will send armies. We'll burn this entire wasteland to bedrock. We'll eliminate every Omega who even thinks about resisting." "No," Mara interrupted calmly. "They won't. Because now they know what I can do. What awakened Omegas can do. And they're going to be too busy trying to keep their own bonded Omegas suppressed to worry about hunting us. Every Omega in the Citadel who hears about this, who learns that the power is real, that the old blood can awaken, they're going to start questioning, resisting, and your perfect system is going to crack from the inside." The temple rumbled again, more insistent this time, and visible cracks appeared in the ceiling directly above where the soldiers were clustered. Not enough to actually collapse it, Mara had careful control, but enough to make the threat absolutely clear. Leave now, or be buried alive. Veyron made the only choice he could. He released the pillar and let himself slide back toward the exit, his dignity in complete tatters, his soldiers scrambling desperately after him. "The Council will hear about this," he shouted as he disappeared into the corridor. "They'll know exactly what you can do. You've just made yourself the highest priority target in the kingdom." "Good," Mara shouted back. "Let them know. Let every Omega in the Citadel know. Let them understand that the power is real and the Council has been lying to them for 300 years. Within minutes, they were gone, the sounds of their retreat echoing through the corridors until even those faded to nothing. The temple quieted gradually. The stones settled back into place with grinding sounds. The light from the altar dimmed to its previous steady pulse. The symbols on the walls faded to faint glows. Mara let the barrier drop completely and immediately collapsed to her knees, utterly exhausted, every muscle trembling. Rena caught her before she hit the ground, strong arms supporting her weight. "Easy. What you just did?" "I know." Mara's voice was barely a whisper, her throat raw. "I can feel it. All of it. Every connection I touched. It's too much, too big. I don't know how to process." "But you controlled it." Rena's voice was filled with awe. "Actually controlled it instead of just exploding randomly. You shaped the power, made it do exactly what you wanted. The altar showed me how. It's like..." Mara struggled to find the right words through her exhaustion. "It's not about forcing anything, not about dominating or controlling through will alone. It's about understanding the connections between things and working with them. The Council's suppressants work by severing those connections, making Omegas blind to them. But once you can see them again, once you understand how they work, you can do anything," Sal finished, her eyes wide with wonder and possibility. "Not anything, but more than they want us to know about, more than they can control." Mara forced herself to stand despite her exhaustion, leaning heavily on Rena. "And I can teach you, all of you. The altar showed me how to break the suppressant's hold, how to help other Omegas awaken without it taking years of isolation and study." Kira still looked skeptical, but less hostile than before, her scarred face thoughtful. "Even if that's true, even if you could awaken every Omega in the wasteland, that's maybe 100 people scattered across thousands of miles. The Citadel has thousands of soldiers, fortifications, centuries of tactical knowledge. We can't win a conventional war with numbers or force. We don't need to win with numbers or force. We just need to make them unable to win with theirs." Mara's mind was racing despite her exhaustion, pieces falling into place, strategy forming. The Council's power depends entirely on controlling the Alpha/Omega dynamic, keeping Alphas dominant and Omegas submissive, creating a society where that hierarchy seems natural, inevitable, unchangeable. But if Omegas aren't powerless anymore, if the bonded Omegas in the Citadel realize they can resist, can choose differently, the system collapses from within, Rena said slowly, understanding dawning. "My God, you're not trying to conquer the Citadel militarily. You're trying to liberate it ideologically, change minds instead of just breaking bodies. I'm trying to give people a choice. The same choice my mother never got. The choice to be powerful or not, free or not. To live according to their own will instead of someone else's design." Mara looked around at the faces watching her. That's what the first Omega wanted. Not domination, just choice. Silence fell as the implications sank in, as they all understood what Mara was really proposing. It was Sal who spoke first, her young voice steady. How do we start? Mara turned back to the altar, feeling it waiting patiently. We learn. The temple has everything: how the power works on a fundamental level, how to teach it to others, how to break suppressant bonds without causing damage, how to help people awaken safely. It's all here, preserved for centuries. We just have to be willing to accept it, to spend the time learning instead of rushing. And then, Kira asked, her tone making it clear she was asking tactically, planning already. Then we go back, not to the wasteland camp. They know where that is now, it's compromised, but to the settlements, the outer settlements where Omegas are sent to die. We find them, awaken them, show them they're not powerless or worthless, build a network they can't crush. Mara met each of their gazes in turn. We build something new, not through conquest, but through liberation. And we make it impossible for the council to stop without destroying themselves in the process. It wasn't a perfect plan. It was dangerous and probably partially insane, and would almost certainly get a lot of them killed before it succeeded, if it succeeded at all. But it was a chance. More than that, it was hope. Real, tangible hope for the first time in their lives. Rena smiled, and for the first time since Mara had met her, it reached her eyes and transformed her weathered face. Your mother would be proud of you. My mother would tell me I'm being reckless and stupid and putting myself in unnecessary danger. Well, yeah, but she'd be proud anyway. Proud that you're choosing to fight instead of hide. Rena looked around at the others. Who's in? Who wants to risk everything for a chance at freedom? Hands rose one by one. Sal first, her burn-scarred hand raised high without hesitation. Then Kira, after a long moment of internal debate, her scarred face set with determination. The others followed until everyone was committed, every hand raised. All right then, Rena said, her voice ringing with purpose. Let's start a revolution. Over the next 3 days, Mara barely slept. The altar didn't just show her information, it downloaded knowledge directly into her consciousness, filling her mind with techniques and understanding that should have taken years or decades to learn. How to sense the suppressant bonds in another Omega's energy field, see them like tangled knots of dark thread wrapped around a light source. How to carefully, painstakingly unravel them without causing damage to the Omega's core self. How to teach others to do the same, to pass the knowledge forward exponentially. She practiced on the Omegas in the temple one by one, learning through trial and error. Sal was first, volunteering immediately despite obvious fear. Mara placed her hands on the younger Omega's shoulders, closed her eyes, and reached for the bonds she could now sense, twisted knots of energy wrapped around Sal's core, choking off her connection to the old blood, making her small and powerless. Carefully, so carefully, she began to unravel them. Each knot had to be undone in sequence, like a puzzle. Rush it, and the Omega's energy could backlash, cause damage, but done correctly. Sal gasped as the first bond broke, her eyes going wide with shock. I can feel. There's something inside me, something warm. Don't force it. Let it come naturally. Let your power show itself. The last bond snapped free, and Sal's hands burst into flame. She yelped and jumped back, shaking her hands frantically in panic. The flames disappeared as quickly as they'd come, responding to her fear. What was that? Sal stared at her hands in wonder and terror. Your power. Your affinity. Mara couldn't help but smile despite her own exhaustion. Looks like you've got a connection to fire, fitting for someone who survived being burned. I can't. This is real. Sal's voice was small, disbelieving. Is that what it's always like when you use power? Different for everyone. The altar said the old blood manifests based on personality, need, trauma, and bloodline. We won't know what each person can do until they awaken. It's unique to the individual. Rena was next. Her power manifested more subtly, but no less impressively. An ability to sense living things around her within about 50 yards, to feel their presence and intentions even through solid walls. Perfect for someone who'd spent years surviving by staying ahead of threats in the wasteland. Kira's awakening was more dramatic. When the last suppressant bond broke, the temperature in the chamber dropped 10 degrees in seconds and frost spread across the stones at her feet, creeping outward in delicate patterns. "Well," Kira said, looking down at the ice forming around her boots with something like satisfaction. "That's new and useful." One by one, Mara awakened the others. Each awakening was unique, each power different and specific to the person. Some were subtle, enhanced senses that let them see in the dark or hear conversations from far away, the ability to influence emotions or read intentions. Others were dramatic, control over elements like Kira's ice, superhuman strength that let them lift stones twice their weight, the ability to heal wounds with touch that left the healer exhausted but the patient whole. By the third day, they weren't a group of desperate refugees anymore. They were something else, something the world hadn't seen in 300 years. They were powerful. As Mara awakened the last Omega in their group, an older woman named Thera, who manifested the ability to manipulate stone and earth, making it flow like water when she concentrated, she felt the bond with Kael pulse urgently. He was closer, much closer than before. She stood on shaking legs and walked to the temple entrance, looking out over the black glass plains that surrounded the ancient structure. In the distance, maybe a mile away, she could see lights. Campfires. An encampment being set up just beyond what seemed to be the temple's boundary, like there was an invisible line they wouldn't cross. They'd come. The Citadel forces had found them again. But this time, Mara wasn't afraid. "They're here," Rena said, coming to stand beside her, her newly awakened senses probably having detected them already. "I know. I can feel Kael through the bond. He's out there." "What do you want to do?" Mara thought about it carefully. About Kael in chains, betrayed by the council he'd served his whole life. About the soldiers who'd probably been conscripted and didn't have a real choice about being here. About the system that crushed everyone under its weight, Alpha and Omega alike, creating suffering for all of them. "I want to talk to him." "That's a terrible idea tactically." "Probably, but I need to try." Mara looked at Rena. "He's bonded to me whether we like it or not, which means there's a connection the council can't completely control or sever. If I can reach him, if I can show him what we've learned, what's possible, he's still a king, still part of the system that oppresses us. Maybe, or maybe he's as trapped as we were, just in a different kind of cage with different bars." Mara's jaw set with determination. "Either way, I'm going out there. I'm choosing to try dialogue before violence." "Not alone, you're not. We don't trust easily." They walked across the black glass plain together, Mara, Rena, Kira, and Sal. 4 Omegas approaching an army camp, glowing faintly with power that hadn't existed in this world for 300 years, carrying hope and revolution in their hearts. The sentries saw them coming from far away and raised the alarm immediately, shouting warnings. Within minutes, Mara was standing outside Kael's tent, surrounded by nervous soldiers who clearly didn't know whether to attack or run from the glowing Omegas who'd walked calmly into their camp. "Let me see him," Mara said clearly. "The king is being held under council orders," one soldier started, his voice uncertain. "I don't care about the council's orders. Let me see him. Now." The tent flap opened and Kael stepped out. He looked terrible. His wrists were still bound with heavy iron chains. His clothes were dirty and torn. He had a fresh bruise darkening his jaw, probably from fighting his captors, and cuts on his knuckles. His hair was disheveled and his eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. But those eyes, when they met hers, were fierce and alive and full of something that might have been hope desperately struggling to survive. "You came back," he said, his voice rough. "I came to talk." "About what?" "About the fact that we're both prisoners of the same system, just in different ways. About the fact that the council used both of us. About the fact that maybe, just maybe, we can break their control together instead of destroying each other." Kael stared at her for a long moment, his alpha senses probably detecting the change in her, the power rolling off her in waves. Then, incredibly, he smiled, tired and battered, but genuine. "I was hoping you'd say something like that. I have a lot to tell you about what happened after they took me." Kael's tent was sparse. A bedroll, a small table with maps, chains attached to a support pole. They'd kept him prisoner in his own command structure, a king without power surrounded by soldiers who answered to someone else. Mara stepped inside while Rena, Kira, and Sal waited outside, close enough to intervene if needed. The tent flap closed, giving them a fragile illusion of privacy. "They're listening," Kael said quietly, gesturing to the tent walls. There are guards positioned all around. Everything we say will be reported back to Veyron. Good. Let them hear. Mara stayed standing, studying him. The bond between them hummed with proximity, stronger now than it had been since that first chaotic moment in the Citadel corridor. She could feel his exhaustion, his frustration, the bone-deep anger at being used. Tell me what happened after they took me. Kael's jaw clenched. I fought them, obviously. He raised his chained hands. Didn't go well. They had orders from the council, signed before we ever left the Citadel. The entire mission was a setup. Send me after you with soldiers loyal to Veyron, wait for me to show weakness, then relieve me of command for being compromised by the bond. They planned it all, every step. The council wanted you dead, but more than that, they wanted me controllable. The bond gave them leverage. His gray eyes met hers. They told me if I cooperated, submitted to their authority completely, they'd let you live in the outer settlements, suppressed but alive. If I resisted, they'd kill me anyway and make sure you watched. Yeah, Kael's voice was rough. I've spent 3 days chained in this tent trying to figure out how to save you from a choice I made that doomed us both. Mara moved closer, studying the chains. Iron, thick and heavy, with locks that looked complex. Did it ever occur to you that maybe I don't need saving? I can feel what you've become through the bond. He shook his head. I don't have words for it. You're different, powerful. But the council has armies, Mara, weapons, 300 years of consolidated control, and I have something they spent 300 years trying to eliminate. She reached out and touched the chains, feeling the metal structure with her newly awakened senses. Iron ore, forged and shaped, held together by molecular bonds she could now perceive. The old blood isn't just party tricks and glowing hands. It's understanding, connection, the ability to work with reality instead of against it. The chains shattered, not melted or unlocked, shattered, the metal crystallizing and falling away like ice breaking. Kael stared at his freed hands, then at her. How did you? The temple taught me, showed me what we used to be before they made us forget. Mara stepped back, giving him space. And now I'm going to teach others, starting with every Omega in the Citadel who's been told they're powerless. That's insane. You'll start a war. We're already in a war. We've been in one for 3 centuries. We were just losing so badly we didn't recognize it as a fight. Mara's voice was steady. The question is whether you're going to help or stand aside. Kael stood slowly, rubbing his wrists where the chains had been. What are you asking me to do? Make a choice. Not as a king, not as someone bonded to me, as a person who's tired of being controlled. She met his gaze. The council used you the same way they used me. Made you think you had power when really you were just their puppet. Are you okay with that? Living your whole life performing for them? What's the alternative? Walk away from the crown? Abandon my people? No, use the crown differently. Stop letting Veyron and his council speak for you. Start actually leading instead of being led. Mara took a breath. When we go back to the Citadel, and we will go back, you can stand with them or with us. But you can't do both. This is the moment where you choose who you actually are. Silence filled the tent. Outside, she could hear soldiers moving, murmured conversations, the crackle of campfires. The bond between them pulsed with Kael's internal struggle, duty versus desire, training versus instinct, everything he'd been taught versus everything he was feeling. Finally, he spoke. If I stand with you, the council will declare me a traitor, strip my title, probably execute me. Probably. And if I stand with them, you'll become my enemy. I'll have to hunt you. You'll try. Mara smiled without humor. Won't work, but you'll try. You're very confident for someone outnumbered 100 to 1. I'm confident because I'm not alone anymore, because I stopped being invisible and started being myself. She turned toward the tent entrance. Think about it, but don't think too long. Things are going to move fast now. Mara, wait. She paused. What you felt from me in the Citadel, when the bond formed. Kael's voice was quieter now, almost vulnerable. That was the first time in my life I felt like I was actually connecting to someone real instead of playing a role. And then they took you, and I let them because I didn't know how to be anything except what they'd trained me to be. I know. I'm sorry for that. for letting fear control me. Mara looked back at him. Then stop letting it. Be better than what they made you. She left the tent. Outside, Rena raised an eyebrow. Well? He's thinking. That's not a commitment. No, but it's a start. Mara looked around the encampment. Soldiers everywhere, but they were nervous, uncertain. They'd seen what she could do at the canyon, seen her break chains and drive off Veyron. The confidence that came from overwhelming force was cracking. We need to move soon, before Veyron brings reinforcements. Where? Kira asked. Back to the temple? No, forward. Mara's mind was racing, strategy crystallizing. To the Citadel. We end this where it started. That's suicide, Sal said flatly. Maybe, but I'm tired of reacting, tired of running. Mara looked at each of them. The Council expects us to hide in the wasteland, slowly build power, take years to become a threat. We're going to do the opposite. We're going to walk through the front gates and force them to choose, change or break. Rena laughed, sharp and a little wild. You've lost your mind. I love it. They returned to the temple to gather the others and prepare. The next day, messengers arrived at the encampment. Not from Veyron, from the Citadel itself. 3 riders on exhausted horses carrying sealed documents with the Council's crest. Mara watched from the temple entrance as the messengers delivered their scrolls to whoever was commanding the camp now that Kael was deposed. Watched the commander's face go pale as he read. Something had changed. An hour later, Kael appeared at the temple entrance, no longer chained. Behind him, a group of soldiers, maybe 20, stood at attention. We need to talk, Kael said. They gathered in the main chamber where the altar still pulsed with steady light. Kael looked at the assembled Omegas, 12 now, all awakened, all glowing faintly with their individual powers. And something shifted in his expression. The Citadel is in chaos, he said without preamble. The Council sent orders to execute me and bring back your bodies as proof of elimination. But word has spread. About the temple. About awakened Omegas. About what happened at the canyon. How? Kira asked sharply. Some of my soldiers weren't as loyal to Veyron as he thought. They've been sending messages back to people they trust. And those people have been talking. Kael pulled out one of the scrolls. 3 bonded Omegas in the Citadel have gone into spontaneous awakening. No one knows why. The suppressants aren't working on them anymore. Mara's breath caught. The temple. When I connected to it, when I learned how the suppressants work, maybe I disrupted them somehow, created a ripple. Whatever you did, it's spreading. The Council is panicking, increasing suppressant doses, which is making Omegas sick. 2 have died from overdose. Kael's voice was grim. And the bonded alphas are refusing to let the Council take their mates for medical treatment. There have been fights, standoffs. The Citadel is tearing itself apart. Good, Kira said coldly. People are dying, Kael shot back. People have been dying for centuries. We just weren't important enough for anyone to notice. Tense silence fell. Mara stepped between them. This is exactly what the Council wants. Us fighting each other instead of them. Kael's right that people dying is bad, but Kira's right that this has been happening all along, just slowly enough that it seemed normal. So what do we do? Sal asked. We give them another option. Mara looked at Kael. You said some soldiers weren't loyal to Veyron. How many? Here? Maybe 40 out of 80. Kael's eyes narrowed. Why? Because we're going to need witnesses. People who can testify that we're not monsters, not trying to destroy the Citadel. That we're offering freedom, not death. Mara's plan was forming as she spoke. We go back. We present ourselves to the entire court, not just the Council, and we show them what's possible when Omegas aren't suppressed. They'll arrest you the moment you enter the gates. They'll try, Mara smiled. But we're not the same people who left. The journey back took 2 days. Mara led a group of 12 awakened Omegas, supported by 40 soldiers who'd chosen to abandon Veyron's orders, with Kael walking beside her as neither prisoner nor king, but something undefined. They didn't sneak, didn't hide. They walked openly through the wasteland, and everywhere they passed, outcasts emerged from hiding. Word had spread here too. The impossible had happened. Omegas had awakened. Some joined them. Others just watched, hope and fear warring in their faces. By the time they reached the Citadel's outer boundaries, their group had swelled to over 60 people. The gates were closed. Guards lined the walls, weapons ready. Mara stepped forward alone, close enough to be heard, but not close enough to be an easy target. "I am Mara Virel," she called out, her voice amplified by a touch of power, so everyone could hear clearly. "Daughter of Sarah Virel, carrier of the old blood. I'm here to speak to the court about the lies you've been told and the freedom you've been denied." "You're a criminal," someone shouted from the walls. "Wanted for treason, destruction of property, murder." "I haven't killed anyone, but the council has. They killed my mother. They've killed countless Omegas through suppressant overdoses and forced relocations, and they'll keep killing until someone stops them." Silence. Then another voice, this one uncertain. "What do you want?" "To offer a choice. Any Omega who wants to awaken, who wants to know their true power, I'll teach them. Free of charge, free of obligation, just choice." Mara took a breath. "And any Alpha who's tired of being controlled by the Council's manipulation of bonds and suppressants, you can choose differently too. This system hurts all of us. The Council will never allow it. Then the Council can fight me directly, instead of sending soldiers who don't want to be here." Mara let power flare around her, bright enough to be visible in the daylight. "I'll wait right here for 1 hour. If Veyron and his council have the courage to face me themselves, I'll answer any challenge. If not, I'm coming in anyway, and anyone who wants freedom can follow." She sat down on the ground in front of the massive gates and waited. Behind her, the awakened Omegas did the same. A peaceful sit-in, non-threatening, but absolutely immovable. The hour passed in tense silence. Then the gates opened. But it wasn't Veyron who emerged. It was Omegas. Dozens of them, streaming out of the Citadel, many still wearing servants' clothes or kitchen uniforms. Some were bonded, their alpha mates walking protectively beside them. Others came alone, desperate and hopeful. "Is it true?" one woman asked, tears streaming down her face. "Can you really awaken us? Give us power." "Yes, but it won't be easy, and it might be dangerous. The Council—" "I don't care about the Council." The woman's voice shook. "I've spent 40 years being invisible, being nothing. If there's even a chance—" "There is." Mara stood. "Everyone who wants to learn, follow me. We're going to need space." They didn't go into the Citadel. Instead, they gathered in the open ground outside the walls where everyone could see. Mara began awakening them one by one, while the others who'd already awakened helped teach, forming a chain of knowledge transfer. It was exhausting. Each awakening took concentration and energy. But as the day wore on, more power began to emanate from the gathered Omegas. More light. More evidence that this was real. Crowds gathered on the walls to watch. And inside the Citadel, the Council convened an emergency session. Night fell, and Mara had awakened 20 Omegas. Each one different. Each one powerful in their own way. That's when Veyron finally appeared. He stood on the wall above the main gate, flanked by the other council members, his face twisted with rage barely held in check. "This is illegal," he shouted. "Unsanctioned use of old magic. You're violating 3 centuries of law and order." "Your laws were built on lies," Mara called back, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "You told us we were powerless, that we needed to be controlled for everyone's safety. But the truth is you were afraid. Afraid that if we remembered what we used to be, you'd lose your control. We brought civilization, structure, safety. You brought oppression and called it civilization to make yourselves feel better about it." Veyron's face went purple. "I'll have you executed for this. You and every Omega who follows you." "Then do it yourself." Mara stepped forward, isolating herself from the group. "Come down here and try. Face me without your soldiers, without your suppressants, without 300 years of systematic control. Just you and me. Let's see whose power is real." The challenge hung in the air. Veyron stared down at her, and she saw the exact moment he realized he couldn't win. Not because she was stronger, though she might be, but because whatever he did next would expose the truth. If he came down and lost, it proved Omegas were powerful. If he came down and won through violence, it proved the Council ruled through force, not legitimate authority. If he refused the challenge, it proved he was afraid. There was no winning move. "This isn't over," Veyron said finally, his voice shaking with impotent rage. No, Mara agreed. It's just beginning, and you can either adapt or be left behind. She turned her back on him, the ultimate dismissal, and returned to the awakened Omegas. The next 3 days were chaotic. More Omegas came. Not all from the Citadel, some from surrounding towns, some from as far as the southern territories. Word was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. The council tried to stop it. They increased suppressant doses, which led to more deaths and more resistance. They threatened bonded alphas, which led to those alphas abandoning the council. They sent soldiers to forcibly disperse the gathering, but the soldiers refused orders when they saw their own bonded mates in the crowd. The system was collapsing exactly as Mara had predicted, not through violence, but through choice. On the 4th day, Kael made his decision public. He stood before the assembled crowd, now numbering in the hundreds, and formally renounced the council's authority. I was raised to believe the council existed to guide and advise, he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. But I've learned they exist to control and manipulate. They used my bond to try to control me. They've used suppressants to control you, and I'm done being part of that system. You'll lose your crown, someone shouted. I'll lose a title, but I'll keep my integrity. Kael looked at Mara. And I'll keep my bond with someone who chose freedom over safety. That's worth more than any crown. The crowd erupted in cheers from some, angry shouts from others. But the message was clear. Even the king himself was choosing differently. That night, Veyron made his final play. He ordered the Citadel Guard to arrest everyone gathered outside the walls. A force of 200 soldiers mobilized, armed and armored, under direct council orders. They marched out to face a crowd of awakened Omegas and their supporters. The two groups faced each other in the darkness, lit by torches and the faint glow emanating from the Omegas. The guard captain stepped forward. By order of the council, you are all under arrest for illegal assembly and use of prohibited magic. Disperse or face consequences. No, Mara said simply. Then we'll make you. The soldiers raised their weapons, and every awakened Omega stepped forward as one, creating a wall of light that pushed back the darkness. Look at us, Mara said, her voice resonating with power. Really look, we're not monsters, not demons, just people who were told we were powerless and chose to believe something different. Your orders are to arrest us for that choice. Is that really what you want to do? Uncertainty rippled through the soldier ranks. We have families, one soldier said quietly. Some of you awakened my sister, my bonded mate. How am I supposed to attack you for helping them? You're supposed to follow orders, the captain snapped. No. The soldier lowered his weapon. I'm supposed to protect people. And right now, you're the threat, not them. One by one, soldiers lowered their weapons. Not all of them. Some stayed loyal to the council, committed to the old ways. But enough broke ranks that the captain's authority crumbled. The attempted arrest became a failed demonstration of power, and everyone saw it happen. The next morning, the council capitulated. Not fully, not gracefully, but they agreed to meet with representatives from the awakened Omegas to discuss terms of coexistence. Mara sat across from Veyron in a negotiation chamber, with Kael, Rena, and Kira flanking her. What do you want? Veyron asked coldly. End the suppressants. Make them optional, not mandatory. Let Omegas choose whether to awaken or not. Mara's voice was steady. And open the historical records. Let people learn the truth about what we used to be. If we do that, chaos is already here. You created it by trying to hold too tight. Mara leaned forward. You can't put this back in the box. The knowledge is out. The power has awakened. You can either work with us to create something new, or you can cling to control until everything falls apart and people get hurt. Your choice. Veyron's jaw worked. Finally, he said, you're asking us to dismantle 3 centuries of social structure. I'm asking you to admit it was built wrong and help fix it. Silence. Then surprisingly, one of the other council members spoke, a woman Mara didn't recognize. Perhaps some compromise is possible. Gradual changes, supervised awakenings to ensure safety, a transition period. No, Mara's voice was firm. Freedom doesn't come with supervision and transition periods. Either we're equals or we're not. You're asking us to give up all our power. I'm asking you to share it. There's a difference. More silence. Then Kael spoke. The council advises, That's your original mandate, according to the founding documents. Advise me. Help me lead in this new reality. But stop trying to control what you can't. Veron looked at him with pure hatred. You're a traitor to your bloodline. Maybe. Or maybe I'm the first one in 300 years to actually lead instead of being led. Kael's voice was steel. I'm giving you a choice, Veron. The same choice Mara gave everyone else. Adapt or become irrelevant. The negotiations took weeks. Compromises were made, though not the ones Veron wanted. The suppressants became optional, and Omegas were given full legal rights to refuse them. The historical records were opened, showing the truth of the old blood and how it had been systematically eliminated. Awakenings were encouraged but not forced, with trained Omegas, Mara and those she'd taught, available to help safely. Some council members resigned in protest. Others adapted, finding new roles in a changing system. And slowly, painfully, the Citadel began to transform. Not all at once, change never happened that fast, but it started. 3 months later, Mara stood in the temple where it had all begun. She wasn't alone. Dozens of Omegas came now, seeking awakening, seeking knowledge, seeking connection to what they'd been denied. She taught others to teach, spreading the knowledge exponentially. Rena ran the training programs. Kira handled security, protecting awakened Omegas from those who still saw them as threats. Sal had become a symbol, young, scarred, powerful, showing that anyone could awaken regardless of their past. Kael had kept his crown, but transformed what it meant. He ruled with a council that now included awakened Omegas, their voices carrying equal weight. It wasn't perfect. There were still struggles, still resistance, still people clinging to the old ways, but it was better. As Mara placed her hands on another Omega's shoulders, feeling the suppressant bonds and beginning to carefully unravel them, she thought about her mother. Sarah had chosen love over vengeance, had sacrificed herself so her daughter could live, and Mara had honored that sacrifice by choosing to live loudly, to be visible, to use her power not for domination but for liberation. The Omega before her gasped as the last bond broke and power flooded through her for the first time. "What do I do with this?" the woman asked, wonder and fear in her voice. "Whatever you choose," Mara said with a smile. "That's the point. You get to choose now." That evening, she found Kael on the temple steps, looking out over the wasteland that was slowly becoming less hostile as awakened Omegas learned to work with the land instead of just surviving it. "You're thinking too loud," she said, sitting beside him. "I keep wondering if we're doing the right thing, if breaking everything that existed before was necessary. It wasn't everything, just the broken parts." Mara leaned against him, feeling the bond hum with contentment. And yes, it was necessary. You can't build something new on a foundation of lies. People are still struggling, still scared. Change is scary. But it's better than slowly dying while pretending everything is fine. She took his hand. Besides, we're not doing this alone. That's what they never understood. Real power isn't about one person controlling everyone else. It's about everyone choosing to work together. Kael was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you think your mother would say about all this?" Mara considered. "I think she'd say I'm being reckless and stubborn and putting myself in unnecessary danger." She smiled. "And then she'd tell me she's proud, that I took the freedom she died for and actually used it to change things instead of just surviving." Do you still feel invisible sometimes? Old habits? Every day. But now when I feel that urge to hide, I choose to be visible anyway. That's the difference. It's not about never being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over a world that was slowly, painfully, beautifully transforming. The council would never fully accept what had happened. Some alphas would always resent the loss of automatic dominance. Some Omegas would choose to remain suppressed, finding safety in familiarity. But enough had chosen differently. Enough had awakened. And that was enough to change everything. Mara had started as nothing, invisible, erased, barely surviving, and she'd become something she'd never imagined. Not by dominating or conquering, but by refusing to stay small, by choosing to take up space, by believing she deserved to exist loudly instead of quietly. The girl who'd been rejected and erased had become the woman who awakened others. And in the end, that was the only power that really mattered, the power to choose who you wanted to be and to help others make that same choice. The wasteland still existed. The citadel still stood. The scars of 300 years of oppression wouldn't heal overnight. But dawn had broken on a new world. And Mara Varel, the Omega who refused to stay buried, had been the one to bring the light.